You are not half the woman your sister is. My mother announced this to a table full of our esteemed church elders, expecting me to shrink away in shame. Instead, I calmly pushed my chair back, wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, and smiled. "Then she can start paying your rent," I replied. My father dropped his fork, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. "Rent?" he stammered. "What rent?" "We own this house." What followed exposed a 2-year-old secret that burned their perfect family image right to the ground. Before I dive into exactly how I evicted my toxic family from their own pedestal, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you know the power of silently building an empire while everyone else underestimates you. My name is Kendra. I am 35 years old, and I have spent the last decade building a commercial real estate portfolio that spans 3 area codes. But to my mother Valerie and my father Desmond, I was just their stubbornly single, deeply unglamorous oldest daughter. It was the 3rd Sunday of the month, which meant my parents were hosting their mandatory family dinner. It was never just a quiet family meal. My mother treated these Sunday dinners like press conferences to showcase her supposedly perfect life to the deans, deacons, and elders of our church. The setting was my parents' sprawling brick estate in a highly coveted affluent suburb. Growing up, this house was a fortress of expectations that I could never quite meet. My mother had spent decades curating every square inch of the property to project an image of undeniable generational wealth and flawless Black excellence. The dining room was an exercise in excessive pride. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm glow over silver cutlery, polished to a blinding shine. The table groaned under the weight of a traditional Sunday spread. There were platters of perfectly seasoned collard greens, baked macaroni and cheese, with the edges caramelized just right buttery cornbread, and a massive roast that my father had carved with performative dignity. At the center of all this opulence sat my 32-year-old sister Aaliyah and her white husband Trent. Aaliyah was the undisputed golden child of the family. She had the flawless silk press, the perfect porcelain veneers, and a terrifying talent for spending money she did not earn. Trent sat beside her, swirling a glass of imported bourbon, looking like a man who believed he owned the world simply by showing up in it. They were currently holding court, bragging loudly to the extended family and the visiting church elders about their upcoming month-long European vacation. "We are starting in Paris for a little shopping," Aaliyah announced, her voice dripping with practiced modesty as she adjusted a diamond bracelet that caught the chandelier light. Trent insisted we needed to update my wardrobe before we head down to the Amalfi Coast. He rented us a private villa right on the cliffs. It is going to be so exhausting, but you know how Trent loves his ocean views. The church elders cooed and praised them, hanging on to every word. Brother Thomas, a senior deacon who had known us since childhood, smiled warmly. "God has truly blessed your union, Aaliyah. It is a beautiful thing to see a young couple prospering so wonderfully." My mother Valerie beamed from the head of the table. She practically glowed with secondhand pride. "Trent works so hard at his finance firm," Valerie chimed in, making sure her voice carried to the far end of the room. "He provides such a beautiful life for my daughter. They are the standard, truly. We could not be prouder." My father Desmond nodded along in agreement. He was a proud man, a retired civil servant who believed he was the undisputed king of his castle. He looked at Trent with the kind of deep respect he had never once directed toward me. I sat quietly at the far end of the long mahogany table, cutting my roast beef and checking my phone under the table. I was not being intentionally rude, nor was I intimidated by their boasting. I was waiting for the final confirmation wire on a $30 million commercial plaza acquisition. My company, Apex Holdings, operated strictly under aggressive non-disclosure agreements and heavy corporate privacy shields. I had learned early on that moving in silence was the ultimate protection against a family that only valued you for what they could extract from you. As far as my parents and sister knew, I managed a few rundown residential properties on the south side of the city. They thought I was a struggling, glorified superintendent who chased after late rent checks and fixed leaky faucets. They had no idea that I owned the high-rise building where Trent used to rent his office space. The tension between my quiet reality and their loud fake wealth was a familiar companion. I simply took a sip of my sparkling water and refreshed my email inbox, waiting for the legal team to confirm the transfer of funds. Kendra. My mother called out, her tone slicing through the warm chatter of the room. Surely you could put the phone away for 1 hour. We are celebrating your sister's blessings. It is incredibly disrespectful to sit there glaring at a screen while we have guests in our home. I slowly set my phone face down on the table and offered a polite, practiced smile. My apologies, Mother. I was just reviewing a contract. Please continue. But Valerie could not just let it go. She had a captive audience of church elders, and she needed to elevate Aaliyah by stepping firmly on my neck. It was a dynamic that had played out since we were children. I was the one who went to a state school on academic scholarships because my parents claimed money was tight, yet 4 years later they somehow managed to take out massive loans to send Aaliyah to an elite private university, simply because the social prestige mattered more to them than financial logic. I was always expected to be the strong one, the independent one who required no nurturing, while Aaliyah was coddled and shielded from every harsh reality the world had to offer. A contract, Valerie sighed, shaking her head dramatically as she looked at the church elders. This girl is always working herself to the bone over those little properties of hers. I tell her all the time she needs to find a good man to take care of her so she can relax. A woman is not meant to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders all by herself. Aaliyah gave a fake sympathetic pout, leaning her head against Trent's shoulder. I worry about you, Kendra. You isolate yourself so much. Trent has some single friends at his firm. Maybe we could set you up. Though they are mostly executives, you might feel a little out of place, but it could be good for you to get out of those work boots. Trent chuckled softly, taking another sip of his bourbon. Let us not overwhelm her, babe. Corporate guys can be a lot to handle for someone not used to that environment. I kept my face perfectly still, betraying absolutely zero emotion. I looked at Trent, noting the slight fraying at the collar of his custom shirt, a subtle sign of financial strain that my trained eye caught immediately. I looked at Aaliyah, playing the role of the pampered housewife. And finally, I looked at my mother, who was practically vibrating with the need to deliver her final blow. Valerie stood up slightly from her chair, raising her wine glass to command the room's full attention. The gentle clinking of silverware stopped. The conversation completely died down. She listed Aaliyah's so-called accomplishments one more time, making sure every guest registered the magnitude of her golden child's success. Look at Aaliyah, Valerie said, her voice echoing in the large room. Married to a top-tier executive, living in a gorgeous gated community, giving us beautiful, healthy grandchildren, and building her lifestyle brand. She represents everything a mother could pray for. Then Valerie turned her gaze directly onto me. The sweet melodic tone of her voice vanished, replaced by a venomous edge that she did not even try to hide from the church members. And then we have Kendra, 35 years old, still completely single. Playing landlord in the rough parts of town, constantly wearing herself out for pennies while everyone else moves forward. You refuse to settle down, you refuse to let anyone help you, and you refuse to soften up. Honestly, Kendra, it breaks my heart to say it, but you are not half the woman your sister is. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was heavy, thick, and profoundly uncomfortable. Brother Thomas cleared his throat softly, looking down at his plate. Sister Jenkins shifted in her seat, her eyes darting nervously between my mother and me. Aaliyah maintained her false look of pity, though her eyes danced with triumph. Trent simply smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass, thoroughly enjoying the public execution of my character. They all expected me to lower my head. They expected me to flush with embarrassment, mumble a weak apology, or perhaps excuse myself to the bathroom to cry in the privacy of a tiled stall. That was exactly what the old Kendra would have done. The 20-something girl who desperately sought her parents' approval would have crumbled under the weight of that public humiliation. But I was no longer that girl. I was a self-made corporate titan who moved millions of dollars before breakfast. I did not tolerate disrespect from rival developers, and I certainly was not going to tolerate it at a dining room table from people who were drowning in their own delusions. I took my time. There was no need to rush my response. I carefully picked up my monogrammed linen napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. I placed the napkin neatly beside my plate. I locked eyes with my mother. Her smug, victorious expression wavered just a fraction of an inch at my absolute lack of emotional distress. I pushed my heavy wooden dining chair back. It scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, the sound cutting through the dead silence of the room. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored trousers. "Then she can start paying your rent," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the icy precision of a corporate boardroom negotiator delivering a final offer. The color literally drained from my father's face. Desmond stared at me as if I had suddenly begun speaking a foreign language, his bushy eyebrows furrowed in deep confusion. He looked at my mother, then back at me. "Rent?" My father barked, his deep baritone voice startling the guests. "What rent?" "We own this house, Valerie. What on earth is the girl talking about?" My mother swallowed hard. Her hand began to tremble slightly, causing the wine in her glass to ripple. "Desmond, please," she whispered, her voice suddenly frail. "Do not listen to her. She is just being spiteful because I hurt her feelings." I did not break eye contact with my mother as I reached down into my designer tote bag resting beside my feet. I pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen, unlocking it, and navigated directly to my secure legal files. I pulled up the official county property deed verified and stamped by the state. I placed the tablet on the table and slid it smoothly down the long stretch of mahogany. It glided past the candied yams, past the crystal water glasses, and stopped right in front of Desmond's plate. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I simply laid out the absolute unfiltered truth for everyone, including the esteemed church elders, to hear. "Read it, Dad," I instructed calmly. "Read the name of the legal entity that owns the house you are sitting in." Desmond picked up the tablet with hesitant, shaking hands. He put on his reading glasses. I watched his eyes scan the legal document. I watched the exact moment his reality shattered. 2 years ago, I began addressing the entire table while keeping my focus on my father. While you thought you were living comfortably on your civil service pension and your hard-earned savings, Valerie had a financial crisis. Aaliyah demanded a $500,000 destination wedding in the Caribbean. She wanted flown-in florists, custom ice sculptures, and a designer gown imported from Italy. Furthermore, Aaliyah had started a luxury lifestyle brand that was bleeding cash daily. Trent refused to pay for the wedding, claiming all his assets were tied up in aggressive market investments that he could not liquidate. Trent stiffened in his chair, his smirk completely vanishing. He sat up straight, opening his mouth to speak, but I held up a single finger, silencing him instantly. I was not finished. To keep up appearances, I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, to make sure the golden child had the wedding of the century and the startup capital for a doomed business. "Valerie went behind your back, Dad. She took out a massive secret second mortgage on this very house. She drained every single drop of equity you two had built over 30 years of marriage. And then she defaulted on the payments." Sister Jenkins let out a quiet gasp, pressing her hand to her chest. Brother Thomas closed his eyes and shook his head. "The bank was exactly 3 weeks away from foreclosing," I stated the cold facts, landing like physical blows. "The sheriff was going to come and throw all of your beautiful, curated belongings out onto the front lawn for the entire neighborhood to see. You were going to be homeless." So Valerie came to my office. She fell on her knees, sobbing, begging for a loan. She swore it was a temporary setback. I walked slowly down the side of the table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. "But I do not give out personal loans for bad debts. I do not do bad business. So I bought the house outright. I purchased it through my private commercial investment firm, Apex Holdings. I paid off the bank in full to save this family from total public humiliation and financial ruin. I allowed you both to continue living here entirely rent-free under one strict, non-negotiable condition. Absolute respect. Desmond stared at the tablet. He looked at the bold letters spelling out Apex Holdings. He looked at the managing director's signature at the bottom of the page. It was my signature. He slowly put the tablet down. The silence in the room was no longer just uncomfortable. It was apocalyptic. Desmond turned his head slowly to look at Valerie. The betrayal in his eyes was profound, raw, and terrifying to witness. "You mortgaged our home for a party!" He screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of raw agony and explosive fury. "You risked everything I worked my entire life to build so these two could parade around on a beach." Valerie was hyperventilating. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking violently as she reached out toward him. "Desmond, please, I can explain. It was an investment. I was going to pay it back. I just needed a little more time." How Desmond roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the dishes rattled. "How are you going to pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars, Valerie? You lied to me for 2 years." Valerie looked desperately toward Aaliyah for help, but the golden child was entirely frozen, her mouth slightly open in shock. Trent was staring at me, as if I had suddenly grown a second head. He set his crystal glass down so carelessly that the bourbon sloshed over the rim onto the white tablecloth. "This is some kind of sick joke." Trent stammered, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "There is no way you have the capital to buy a house like this. You manage low-income housing." I turned my attention fully to Trent and my sister. I walked behind my father's chair and retrieved my tablet, slipping it smoothly back into my tote bag. I looked down at Aaliyah, who was suddenly trying to shrink and disappear into the upholstery of her expensive dining chair. All of her previous arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the panicked realization that the safety net she relied on did not belong to her parents. It belonged to the sister she had spent her life mocking. "Since you are twice the woman I am," I told Aaliyah, making sure my voice carried clearly over the sound of my mother's weeping and my father's heavy, furious breathing, "you should have absolutely no problem supporting our parents now. My charity ends today. The new lease agreement starts on the 1st of the month." I looked directly into Trent's wide, angry eyes. "The rent is $4,500 a month. If the funds are not cleared and sitting in my corporate holding account by 5 p.m. on the 1st of the month, I will file the eviction papers immediately. Do not test me. I guarantee my legal team is much more aggressive than whatever lawyers you pretend to keep on retainer." I did not wait for a response from either of them. I did not need to stick around to watch the fallout. The power dynamic in the room and in our family had been irreparably shifted forever. I walked purposefully over to the grand entryway and slipped my arms into my custom-tailored cashmere coat. Behind me, the dining room had devolved into absolute unfiltered chaos. Desmond was shouting, demanding that Valerie produce every single bank statement and financial record immediately. Valerie was sobbing hysterically, pleading with Aaliyah to say something to help fix the disaster. The church elders were hurriedly and awkwardly gathering their coats and belongings, murmuring quick prayers and apologies as they desperately tried to escape the imploding household before the shouting escalated further. I opened the heavy, solid oak front door, stepping out onto the expansive front porch. The cool, crisp evening air hit my face, refreshing and clean. I took a deep, steadying breath, completely unbothered by the blazing fire I had just intentionally set to their fake empire. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I only felt the profound lightness of a burden finally being dropped. As I walked down the long, paved driveway toward my car, my phone buzzed twice in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the glowing screen. It was the secure confirmation email from my acquisitions team. The $30 million commercial plaza deal had officially closed. The funds were secured. I smiled, unlocking my car doors. The timing could not have been more poetic. As the sound of my father's furious shouting echoed faintly from the house behind me, I slid into the driver's seat, knowing with absolute certainty that this was only the very beginning of my true freedom. The engine of my car hummed a steady, quiet rhythm as I merged onto the highway, leaving the suffocating manicured lawns of my parents' neighborhood far behind. The glowing dashboard display indicated 34 missed calls. all within the 20-minute span it took me to hit the interstate. I did not answer a single one. I simply let the automated voice system catch their panic while I drove toward the skyline. That was where I belonged. Not in a stuffy dining room fighting for scraps of validation from people committed to misunderstanding me. I belonged among the steel and the glass. I pulled into the private underground parking garage of the Sovereign. It was a 40-story luxury high-rise right in the beating heart of the downtown financial district. The night concierge tipped his hat to me as I bypassed the main lobby and stepped directly into the private biometric elevator. I did not just lease the penthouse at the top of this building. My development firm broke ground on it 3 years ago. I owned the concrete, the steel, and the air rights above it. My family thought I was a failure because I did not fit their narrow, outdated definition of success. They wanted me to be a dutiful wife to a man who would control my assets. Instead, I became the asset. The elevator doors slid open directly into my foyer. I dropped my keys on the marble console table and slipped out of my coat. The silence of the penthouse was a stark, beautiful contrast to the screaming match I had just left behind. I walked over to the custom wet bar and poured myself a generous glass of a bold vintage Cabernet. Only then did I pull my phone from my bag and open my voicemail inbox. The first message was from my mother. Her voice was shrill, frantic, and entirely devoid of any actual remorse for the financial crimes she had committed against her own husband. "Kendra, pick up this phone right now." The recording echoed into my quiet living room. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" Brother Thomas practically ran out of the house without saying goodbye. "You humiliated me in front of the entire church board. How could you lie like that and embarrass your own sister?" Trent is furious. "You need to call your father right now and tell him you made a mistake. Tell him the numbers were wrong and you were just being spiteful. You fix this, Kendra. You protect this family image, or so help me God. I will never forgive you." I took a slow sip of my wine. Delete. My mother was completely delusional. She had secretly mortgaged the roof over her head to pay for Aaliyah to have imported orchids and a private villa in the Caribbean. She had stared down the barrel of a bank foreclosure. Yet her only concern right now was what Deacon Thomas thought of her Sunday spread. She still believed she could command me to fall on my sword to protect her facade. She still thought the image mattered more than the foundation. That was exactly why she was broke and I was building an empire. The next voicemail was from my father. His tone was entirely different. It was heavy, stripped of the booming patriarchal pride he had been projecting just an hour earlier. "Kendra, it is your father." A heavy sigh crackled through the speaker. "I need the records. Every single bank statement, every mortgage document, the original deed, all of it. Send it to my personal email tonight. I need to know exactly how much debt my wife put my name on for that damn wedding and that failed business. Do not protect her. Send the files. Save." My father was finally waking up, but it was 20 years too late. He had enabled Valerie for decades, allowing her to treat me like a second-class citizen, while showering Aaliyah with resources they did not actually have. Now the bill had come due. He wanted the files, but I had already forwarded the encrypted dossier to his inbox before I even left their driveway. He was currently sitting in the wreckage of his own willful ignorance. The third voicemail was from Aaliyah. Her voice dripped with the kind of unearned arrogance that only a deeply insecure person could manage. "You are sick, Kendra." The audio played crisp and clear. "Trent is calling our lawyers right now. You think a fake piece of paper on an iPad is going to scare us out of our own home? You are just a bitter, jealous woman who cannot stand that I have a real man and a real life. You have always been jealous of me. We are taking you to court and we are going to sue you for harassment. You picked the wrong family to mess with." I laughed out loud. The sound bounced off the floor to ceiling windows of my living room. Delete. Aaliyah was about to learn how expensive a real courtroom battle actually was. She was clinging to Trent as her savior, completely unaware that her so-called top-tier executive husband was currently unemployed and secretly drowning in debt. They were two parasites fighting over a host they had already bled dry. I walked over to the massive wall of glass that made up the entire southern edge of my penthouse. The city stretched out below me, a sea of glittering lights and endless possibilities. I took another sip of the Cabernet, letting the rich, dark flavor settle on my tongue. I looked down at the commercial blocks, the busy intersections, and the glowing high-rises. My family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They demanded that I shrink so Aaliyah could feel big. They expected me to break my back in the dark so they could shine in the light. But standing there looking over the downtown grid, I felt nothing but absolute power. I was not playing landlord in the rough parts of town. I was quietly buying up this city block by block, building a legacy that no one could ever take away from me. They wanted to play games with fake wealth and borrowed status. Let them. I owned the board. My phone buzzed again in my hand. It was a text message from Tasha, my best friend, my sorority sister, and my lead corporate counsel. The message was brief, but it carried the weight of a loaded weapon. Drinks at the usual spot. We need to talk about your sister husband. He just made a massive mistake. I smiled, tapping a quick confirmation reply. The wine suddenly tasted even better. The eviction notice was just the opening act. The real dismantling of their fake empire was about to begin. I walked into the Onyx room 20 minutes later. It was an ultra-exclusive subterranean speakeasy where the lighting was kept low and the steep membership fees kept the unwanted crowds firmly outside. Tasha was already seated in a curved leather booth tucked away in the back corner. She wore a sharp-tailored charcoal power suit that screamed billable hours and corporate dominance. A pair of signature gin martinis sat on the polished brass table between us. Tasha did not even wait for me to take off my coat before diving right in. I heard all about the dinner disaster, she said, sliding one of the chilled glasses toward me. Your mother left 4 hysterical voicemails on my law firm's emergency line. She actually demanded that I draft a formal cease and desist order against you for emotional distress. I sat down and took a slow sip of the cold gin. And what exactly did you tell her? I told her my hourly rate is $900, and I do not accept clients facing imminent eviction. Tasha replied, a razor-sharp grin spreading across her face. We clinked our glasses together. The crystal chimed perfectly in the dim room. Tasha had been my absolute rock since our freshman year at the State University. We pledged the same sorority, pulled the same grueling all-nighters to keep our grades up, and survived the exact same toxic family dynamics. She understood the specific brand of suffocating pressure that came from being the reliable, high-achieving daughter in a Black household that refused to celebrate your success. They really thought you were bluffing at that table, Tasha said, shaking her head in disbelief. Your parents drained their entire retirement savings, took out predatory personal loans, and mortgaged their actual roof just so Aaliyah could prance around an elite private college for 4 years. They bought her the designer bags, paid for the luxury dorms, and funded her entire performative lifestyle just so she could catch a man like Trent. Meanwhile, you were working 2 jobs on a full academic scholarship, and they did not even offer to buy your textbooks. Because I was the strong one, I said, the familiar bitter taste of resentment rising in the back of my throat. It was the same excuse my mother used for every single inequity in our household growing up. Whenever I needed anything, it was always the same rehearsed speech. You are so smart, Kendra. You are so resourceful. You are a strong Black woman. You will figure it out on your own. But Aaliyah was fragile. Aaliyah needed a safety net. Aaliyah needed to be shielded from the harsh realities of the world. They weaponized your independence against you, Tasha stated flatly. They turned you into the family workhorse so Aaliyah could be the show pony. And the moment that pony married a white man in a custom-tailored suit, your parents thought they had hit the ultimate social lottery. They let Trent walk into their house and act like he owned the place because they were absolutely blinded by the illusion of his generational wealth and access. I leaned back against the heavy leather booth. The irony of the entire situation was suffocating. Trent paraded around with his country club memberships and his leased luxury cars, acting like he was doing our family a massive favor simply by associating with us. My parents practically worshipped the ground he walked on. They bent over backward to accommodate his dietary restrictions, his condescending political opinions, and his relentless arrogance. They handed him the keys to the kingdom while tossing me the leftover scraps. And the whole time I said, setting my glass down firmly on the brass table, Trent was financially bleeding them dry to prop up his own failing image. Aaliyah played right along with the charade. She took my parents' hard-earned money to fund her pathetic lifestyle brand that sells overpriced candles to nobody. They consumed everything in their path. And when the well finally ran dry, my mother expected me to quietly open my checkbook and save them from the bank without a single word of gratitude. Tasha pulled her sleek tablet out of her leather briefcase. That is the true tragedy of it all. You actually stepped in. You bought the house through Apex Holdings. You saved them from total public ruin. And what did they do in return? They invited the very parasites who drained them to a Sunday dinner just to humiliate you for not being married. It is a textbook case of biting the hand that feeds you. But the joke is entirely on them because Trent just made a fatal miscalculation. I leaned forward, the mention of Trent instantly sharpening my focus. Your text message said he made a massive mistake. What did he do? Tasha tapped the screen of her tablet and slid it across the table. Trent thinks you are just a low-level property manager for Apex Holdings. His arrogance simply cannot comprehend that a black woman from a state school actually owns the multi-million-dollar corporate entity that holds the deed to his in-law's house. He thinks you are just the angry middleman, so he decided to go over your head. I looked down at the illuminated screen. It was an email forwarded directly from my company's general legal contact address. Read it, Tasha urged, her eyes gleaming with predatory delight. I scanned the text quickly. Trent had written a highly aggressive, legally illiterate email addressed to the board of directors at Apex Holdings. He demanded that the company immediately reprimand their employee Kendra for unauthorized harassment and unprofessional conduct. He claimed that I had forged lease agreements and was attempting to extort his family out of spite. He then demanded to speak to the actual owner of the firm to arrange a rapid transfer of the property deed into his name, citing a conflict of interest and offering to manage the asset himself. He is trying to steal the house, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady whisper. He is trying to bypass me and trick my own company into handing him the asset for free. Tasha laughed, a rich, genuine sound that cut beautifully through the low jazz playing in the lounge. He sent a blind extortion threat directly to our corporate legal department. My department. He just handed us written proof of his intent to commit fraud. He thinks he is playing chess, but he does not even know what board he is standing on. I picked up my martini glass. The anger that had been simmering in my chest all evening completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Trent and Aaliyah had pushed their luck for years, shielded by my parents' endless enabling and desperate need for social validation. They thought they could bully me out of my own property because they believed the very lies my mother told about my worth. They thought I was weak. They want a war, I said, staring at Trent's ridiculous, arrogant email. They think I am going to back down because they throw around hollow legal threats and hide behind white privilege. Tasha raised her glass to meet mine, the sharp clink sealing the promise between us. They have no idea that they just walked directly into a slaughterhouse. My phone vibrated violently against the brass table right on cue. I glanced down at the glowing screen. The caller ID flashed a name that made Tasha raise an immaculately groomed eyebrow. It was Trent. I looked at Tasha. She took a slow sip of her martini and gave me a single sharp nod. I swiped the screen and put the call on speaker, resting the phone exactly between our two drinks. Kendra, it is. Trent. His voice echoed from the small speaker. I have caller ID, Trent. To what do I owe the displeasure? He let out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. It was the classic exasperated savior routine, perfectly practiced to make me feel like an unruly subordinate who needed to be brought to heel. Listen, Kendra. I am calling to step in and smooth things over before this gets any further out of hand. Your parents are an absolute mess right now. Aaliyah is in tears in the passenger seat of my car. I know you are trying to prove a point because you are jealous of your sister, but you are tearing this family apart over a petty grievance. Tasha silently mouthed the word jealous and rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might injure herself. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Is that right, Trent? I am tearing the family apart by paying off a foreclosure. Do not play semantics with me. He snapped his tone, dripping with unchecked white privilege and overwhelming condescension. You ambushed them. You humiliated your mother in front of her community to feed your own ego. But I am a reasonable man. I am willing to fix this and protect everyone involved. Here is what we are going to do. I repeated coldly. Yes, Trent commanded, completely oblivious to the trap he was standing in. You are going to transfer the deed of that house into my name by the end of the week. You are clearly in over your head playing with corporate entities. I will take over managing your parents' finances and their estate from here on out, since you clearly do not know how to handle family wealth gracefully. You overplayed your hand tonight, Kendra. Transfer the property to me, and I will make sure your parents forgive you for this little stunt. I stared at the phone. For a brief second, the sheer breathtaking audacity of this man actually stunned me into silence. He had just demanded that I hand over a multi-million-dollar asset that I paid for with my own cash, claiming I did not know how to handle wealth gracefully. I threw my head back and laughed. I laughed out loud, a deep, genuine echoing sound that made a few heads turn in the dark lounge. Tasha covered her mouth to stifle her own laughter, shaking her head at the pure comedy of his arrogance. I am glad you find the destruction of your family so amusing. Trent snarled, his voice tightening with sudden volatile anger. I am offering you a way out, Kendra. Do not be stupid. I stopped laughing. My voice dropped, all traces of amusement becoming as cold and hard as concrete. Handle family wealth. I repeated, articulating every single syllable. You want to handle family wealth, Trent. You cannot even handle your own car lease. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? Do not play stupid with me. I fired back, leaning closer to the phone. I know exactly what you are. I know that you were fired from Sterling Financial Capital exactly 6 months and 12 days ago. I know you did not resign. I know you were escorted out of the building by security for gross incompetence and a spectacular failure to meet basic portfolio management quotas. The silence on the line was absolute. Trent was not breathing. I could hear Aaliyah sobbing faintly in the background, suddenly realizing that her carefully guarded secret had just been ripped wide open. You have zero income. Trent, I stated, driving the blade in deeper. You have been unemployed for half a year. Aaliyah has been maxing out secret high-interest credit cards just to hide it from my parents, so her little country club friends do not find out she married a broke, unemployed fraud who cannot even secure a mid-level analyst position. Shut up! Trent hissed, his voice dropping into a vicious, panicked whisper. You shut your mouth right now. You demanded that I transfer a house into your name, I continued, relentless. A house you plan to leverage immediately to pay off the mounting debts you are drowning in. You thought you could bully a black woman out of her own property because you bought into my mother's delusion that I am weak. You thought I was just some ghetto landlord you could easily outsmart. Listen to me, you arrogant witch. Trent exploded, his mask of polite superiority completely shattering. You think you are so smart. You think you can talk to me like this. You are nothing but an unmarried, miserable woman who got lucky on a couple of cheap real estate deals. I will drag you through the courts. I will sue you for everything you own. I will tie that house up in so much litigation you will beg me to take it off your hands. You do not know who you are messing with. I picked up my phone. No, Trent. I said, my voice steady, powerful, and completely unbothered. You do not know who you are messing with, but you are going to find out very soon. The rent is due on the 1st. Have my money or have your bags packed. I tapped the red button, ending the call instantly. I tossed the phone back onto the table. Tasha was grinning from ear to ear. She raised her glass one more time. To the unemployed finance bro, she toasted. May his legal bills be as high as his audacity. To the eviction, I replied, clinking my glass against hers. Trent had just made his second fatal mistake of the night. He thought his threats would intimidate me into backing down. He thought the prospect of a courtroom battle would make me fold. He did not realize that I practically lived in courtrooms, and I had the deepest pockets in the city to fund any war he wanted to start. My phone lit up again. It was a text message from an unknown number, but I knew immediately who it was from. Aaliyah. The text read, "You ruined my life tonight. Trent is breaking things in the house. We need to talk. Please, Kendra. I need you to help me fix this." I stared at the message. She was still trying to play the victim. She still expected me to sweep in, clean up the mess she created, and save her from the consequences of her own fraudulent marriage. I swiped left on the notification and deleted the thread. I was done saving people who would happily watch me drown. I looked at Tasha. "They are going to try to forge the transfer," I said calmly. "Trent is desperate. He is backed into a corner. He has no income, and he just realized I know everything. He is going to try to steal the property out from under Apex Holdings using Aaliyah as leverage." Tasha nodded, her lawyer instincts fully engaged. "We need to set the trap. We let them think they found a loophole. We let them walk right into your office." "Exactly," I agreed. "I am going to give them enough rope to hang themselves. We are taking everything they have left." Monday morning arrived, with the crisp, uncompromising efficiency that I demanded from every aspect of my life. Walking into the executive suite of Apex Holdings was always a grounding experience. My corporate headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek, modern high-rise in the city center. The aesthetic was deliberate. Dark walnut wood polished concrete floors and walls of soundproof glass that offered an unobstructed view of the skyline I was steadily buying up. There were no raised voices here. There was no desperate posturing or performative boasting. There was only the quiet, powerful hum of legitimate wealth and meticulously executed business deals. I sat behind my custom marble desk, sipping a double espresso while reviewing the latest zoning permits for a commercial plaza acquisition. The chaos of my family's Sunday dinner felt like a distant, irrelevant television show I had simply turned off. I had compartmentalized the betrayal, filed it away in the correct mental drawer, and returned to the business of expanding my empire. My office doors swung open without a knock. Tasha strode in, clutching a sleek leather folio against her chest. She was wearing a stunning crimson pantsuit, her heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete. She did not even say good morning. She simply marched directly to my desk, pulled a single printed sheet of paper from her folio and placed it perfectly in the center of my desk pad. "He actually did it," Tasha said, her voice practically vibrating with absolute predatory delight. I knew he was arrogant, but I severely underestimated his stupidity. He took the bait and sprinted right off the cliff. I set my espresso down and picked up the paper. It was a printed email. "Because I operate at a high net worth level, my personal name is intentionally scrubbed from all public-facing documents regarding Apex Holdings. I utilize a complex web of blind trusts, registered agents, and holding companies to protect my privacy and shield my assets from frivolous lawsuits. To the untrained eye, Apex Holdings is just a massive, faceless corporate entity managed by a board of invisible directors." Trent, functioning on the absolute peak of his unearned white privilege, had done exactly what a mediocre, unemployed finance bro would do. He assumed I was merely a low-level property manager. He assumed I was a rogue employee, abusing my limited administrative power to extort my own family out of a personal vendetta. He truly believed he could step over my head, contact my corporate overlords, and get me fired while swooping in to claim the property for himself. He had gone to the Apex Holdings public website, found the general corporate legal contact email, and sent a formal complaint. He had absolutely no idea that every single message sent to that specific legal inbox routed directly to Tasha's private server. He essentially mailed his extortion attempt directly to my best friend. "Read it out loud," Tasha insisted, pulling up a chair opposite my desk and crossing her legs. "I want to hear it again. It is pure poetry." I cleared my throat, adjusting my posture as I scanned Trent's ridiculous attempt at corporate intimidation. To the board of directors and executive management of Apex Holdings, I began reading Trent's pompous words. "I am writing to you today as the authorized financial representative of Valerie and Desmond, the rightful owners of the residential property currently being fraudulently managed by your employee Kendra." I paused, looking up at Tasha. Authorized financial representative. He appointed himself their wealth manager 24 hours after losing his job. "Keep going." Tasha urged, grinning. It gets so much better. I looked back at the email. It has recently come to my attention that your employee Kendra has engaged in highly unethical and predatory behavior. She has abused her position within your firm to coerce her elderly mother into signing a predatory lease agreement under extreme emotional duress. Kendra has a well-documented history of jealousy and mental instability regarding her sister, my wife, Aaliyah. She is now using Apex Holdings resources to exact a petty personal vendetta. I felt a muscle in my jaw tighten. The sheer audacity to paint me as an unstable, jealous woman while he sat unemployed in a house I paid for was staggering. But the next paragraph shifted my anger into absolute ice-cold calculation. We possess signed affidavits confirming that Valerie was not of sound mind when any previous transfer documents were executed, Trent wrote. We are prepared to bring these documents to the State Housing Authority and the local media to expose the predatory lending practices of Apex Holdings. However, as a professional in the finance sector, I prefer to settle matters discreetly. We are willing to withhold formal litigation and press involvement. In exchange, we demand the immediate termination of Kendra's employment and the rapid execution of a quitclaim deed transferring the property directly into a family trust managed by myself. I look forward to resolving this quietly with the true owners of your firm. I placed the paper back onto the marble desk. The silence in my office was heavy. I scrolled down to the bottom of the printed page, noting the carbon copy recipients. Trent had CC'd Aaliyah. He had also attached a scanned PDF document. It was a handwritten statement from my mother, Valerie. I read the brief attachment. My own mother had signed a statement claiming I had manipulated her, threatened her, and forced her into the original sale of the house. She had willingly provided Trent with a falsified document to help him extort a company she thought I worked for, fully knowing it would likely result in me losing my job and facing criminal charges. Valerie was willing to throw her own daughter into a federal prison just to protect Trent's fragile ego and maintain Aaliyah's fake lifestyle. Any lingering microscopic shred of familial loyalty I held for the woman who gave birth to me vanished in that exact second. My mother was not just a toxic enabler anymore. She was an active co-conspirator in a felony. This crosses the line from a bitter family dispute to federal wire fraud and attempted extortion. Tasha stated, her lawyer persona taking complete control of the room. Trent used an electronic communication network to transmit a threat of reputational and financial damage against a corporate entity in exchange for the transfer of real property. That is a felony. And because your mother signed that fraudulent affidavit, and your sister is actively copied on the communications, they are legally complicit. We have them. We have them dead to rights on a silver platter. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, steepling my fingers together. Trent thought he was dealing with corporate executives who would panic at the threat of bad press. He thought a group of old white men in a boardroom would immediately throw a disruptive black female employee under the bus to protect their bottom line. He wanted to speak to the manager. We are going to give him exactly what he wants, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Tasha raised an eyebrow. You want me to respond? I nodded, sliding the email back toward her. Reply from the generic corporate counsel address. Do not use your personal signature. Use the automated legal department stamp. Tell Mr. Trent that the executive board of Apex Holdings takes these allegations of employee misconduct incredibly seriously. Tell him that the company is deeply disturbed by Kendra's alleged actions and that management wishes to avoid any public scandal or state investigations. Tasha's smile widened as she caught the vision. We invite them in, she said, her fingers already flying across the screen of her tablet as she began drafting the response. We tell them the board is willing to negotiate the deed transfer and a temporary forbearance on the property to settle the dispute quietly. Make sure you tell him that the transfer requires an in-person meeting at our corporate headquarters, I instructed. Tell him the executives want to meet the authorized financial representative face-to-face to execute the paperwork. Stroke his ego. Make him feel like a masterful corporate shark who just successfully bullied a billion-dollar holding company into submission. He will not be able to resist the opportunity to walk into a downtown high-rise and play the hero for Aaliyah. Tasha hit a button on her screen, locking in the draft. And when they show up, I said, looking out the glass walls of my office toward the sprawling city below, they are going to expect to sit across from a team of frightened corporate executives. They are going to expect to walk away with the deed to my property. I want you to prepare the documents exactly as he requested. Draft the quitclaim deed. Bury the transfer language in thick, dense legal jargon so he thinks he is getting the house and total control over the parents' accounts. You are going to sign it, Tasha asked, verifying the strategy. I am going to sign it, I confirmed. I am going to let Aaliyah and Trent sit in my own conference room, and I am going to let them gloat. I am going to let Trent run his mouth. I want every single racist, sexist, entitled thought he has floating around in his head out in the open. I am going to sign that document using the absolute most fraudulent, legally void signature I can muster. Because the moment I put a fake pen to that paper, the crime is complete. We will have them executing an extortion plot on camera in high definition. Tasha stood up, smoothing the front of her suit jacket. I will send the email right now. I will schedule them for tomorrow afternoon. I will make sure the security cameras in conference room B are running perfectly. Trent wanted to bypass me and speak to the true owner of Apex Holdings. He was about to get his wish. He was about to walk into the very heart of my empire, completely blind to the fact that the corporate machine he thought he was manipulating was actually a slaughterhouse built entirely by my own two hands. The appointment was set for 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. I sat behind my marble desk and watched the live feed from the lobby security cameras on my secondary monitor. Aaliyah stepped off the elevator and froze. I could see the exact moment her brain struggled to process her surroundings. She had clearly expected a dingy administrative office located in a strip mall. Instead, she was standing in a 2-story glass atrium featuring a cascading water wall and the brushed steel logo of Apex Holdings. She approached the reception desk wearing a beige tweed suit that screamed desperate country club wife. She carried a faux crocodile leather folder clutched tightly to her chest. Through the audio feed, I heard her use her most entitled customer service voice to announce that she was there on behalf of her husband to speak with the executive board regarding a hostile employee named Kendra. My receptionist simply smiled her practiced corporate smile and guided my sister down the hallway toward the executive suites. I muted the security feed and folded my hands on the desk. The heavy oak doors to my office swung open. Aaliyah walked in with her chin held high, ready to demand my termination from a group of imaginary white men in suits. She took 3 steps into the expansive room and stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes darted wildly around the space, taking in the custom modern artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, and the sprawling private conference area. Finally, her gaze landed on me. I was sitting perfectly still in my high-backed leather chair, wearing a custom-tailored emerald green blazer. Kendra, she breathed, her voice cracking. What are you doing in here? Where is the managing director? Trent was told the board would be handling this negotiation. I did not offer her a seat. I simply looked at her. I am the managing director, Aaliyah. I am the board. There are no invisible men in suits coming to save you. Apex Holdings belongs to me. I built it. I own it. You are standing in the center of my empire. I watched her physical reaction as the truth completely annihilated her worldview. The color drained from her face. Her perfectly glossed lips parted in absolute shock. The narrative she had clung to her entire life, the comforting lie that she was the successful sister, and I was the struggling failure, shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there on my polished concrete floor. She realized in a matter of seconds that the multi-million-dollar company her unemployed husband had just tried to extort was entirely my property. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. A normal person would have apologized. A normal person would have felt a profound sense of shame for colluding with their husband to steal their sister's assets. But Aaliyah was the golden child. She had been trained by our mother to weaponize her emotions the moment she faced any real accountability. Her posture immediately collapsed. The arrogant posture vanished, replaced by trembling shoulders and wide, fearful eyes. The fake tears arrived exactly on schedule, welling up and spilling over her mascara. "Oh, Kendra," she sobbed, rushing forward to grip the edge of my marble desk. You have to believe me. I did not want any of this to happen. This is all Trent. He is completely out of control. I leaned back in my chair watching her perform. I did not hand her a tissue. I did not offer a word of comfort. Go on, I said, my voice entirely devoid of warmth. Aaliyah let out a dramatic, shaky breath. He lost his job, Kendra. He has been hiding it from me for months. He has been taking out terrible loans and dealing with awful people. When you dropped that bomb at dinner, he completely snapped. He is terrified of losing his status. I am terrified of him. Mom and Dad are practically having heart attacks worrying about being thrown out on the street. I just want peace. I just want our family to be okay again. She reached across the desk, trying to grab my hand, but I smoothly pulled it back. She retracted her fingers, looking down at the faux crocodile folder she had brought with her. He made me bring this to you, she whimpered, sliding the folder across the smooth marble surface until it stopped inches from my keyboard. He told me to come up here and beg the corporate office for mercy. He said if I did not get this signed, he was going to leave me and take whatever money we have left. Please, Kendra. I know we have had our differences, but you are my big sister. I need you to protect me. I looked down at the folder. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was playing the helpless victim, blaming the entire extortion plot on the aggressive white husband while banking on my lifelong conditioning to step in and save her. She thought my instinct to protect Black women would override my business acumen. She thought she could invoke the sisterhood she had spent 3 decades disrespecting. I flipped the folder open. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents printed on premium bonded paper. It was titled as a temporary forbearance and asset management agreement. What exactly is this, Aaliyah? I asked, keeping my eyes on the pages. It is just a temporary hold, she answered quickly, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. It just gives Mom and Dad some breathing room. It stops the eviction and lets Trent review the financial ledgers for a few months, so he feels like he is in control. It does not actually change who owns the house. It just pauses the conflict so we can all sit down and figure this out like a family. Please just sign it so I can go home and tell him the crisis is over. I scanned the documents. Tasha had already intercepted the digital draft Trent had sent to my legal department, so I knew exactly what was buried on page 4. It was not a temporary forbearance. It was a fully executed quitclaim deed, hidden under layers of dense predatory legal jargon. If I signed this document, I would immediately surrender the title of my parents' house directly into a blind trust controlled entirely by Trent. Furthermore, a deeply buried clause attempted to grant his trust managerial oversight of the primary operating account linked to Apex Holdings. They were not just trying to steal the house, they were trying to hijack my corporate cash flow. I looked back up at Aaliyah. Her eyes were wide and pleading. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. But I saw the slight tension in her jaw. I saw the way her fingers tapped nervously against her thigh. She knew exactly what was in this folder. She was a willing, active participant in an attempted multi-million-dollar heist against her own flesh and blood. You just want breathing room, I stated, summarizing her ridiculous pitch. You want me to pause the eviction to save your marriage? Yes, she gasped, nodding frantically. That is all. Just sign it, and I swear I will make Trent back off. I will make sure Mom and Dad respect your boundaries. I just need you to be the strong one right now, Kendra. You have always been the strong one. I closed the folder and rested my hand flat on top of it. I had to commend her dedication to the role. She was willing to look me in the eye and commit felony fraud while weaponizing the very trauma our parents had inflicted on me. I will review the documents, Aaliyah. I said, my tone perfectly neutral and detached. I will run this past my legal team. If everything is as simple as you say it is, we can proceed. Her face dropped. A flash of genuine panic broke through her victim act. But Trent needs it signed today, Kendra. He is waiting outside in the car right now. He told me not to come back down without the signature. Perfect. That was exactly the piece of information I was waiting for. Trent was sitting in my parking garage, too cowardly to face the corporate executives himself, sending his black wife into the building to do his dirty work. Well then, I said, standing up from my chair and smoothing my blazer. You should probably call your husband and tell him to come up here, because I do not sign binding financial agreements without all managing parties present in the room. Aaliyah swallowed hard, realizing she had just lost control of the narrative. Tell Trent to come up to the penthouse suite, I commanded, pointing toward the door. We are going to negotiate this family dispute face to face. Aaliyah pulled her phone from her designer handbag. Her manicured fingers shook as she dialed. She turned away from me, whispering frantically into the receiver. Less than 5 minutes later, the heavy oak doors to my office swung open again. Trent walked in. He wore a navy blue suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a desperate attempt to project the image of a Wall Street rainmaker. He took one look at the cascading water wall, the custom marble desk, and the panoramic view of the city, and I saw the exact moment his fragile ego fractured. He was standing in a fortress built by a black woman he had spent years dismissing as a peasant. But true to his nature, he immediately masked his profound insecurity with loud, unearned arrogance. He swaggered over to the leather chair next to Aaliyah, dropping into it and crossing his ankle over his knee. Kendra, he said, using that grating, paternalistic tone. I see you managed to secure a nice little workspace for yourself. Very flashy. But let us get down to business. I have a very tight schedule today. I did not point out that his schedule consisted entirely of being unemployed. I simply reached under my desk and pressed a concealed biometric button. A tiny green light flashed on the underside of the smoke detector above us. The high-definition audio and video recording system was now capturing every single frame of this interaction directly to a secure cloud server. Aaliyah tells me you brought a temporary forbearance agreement, I said. Folding my hands perfectly on the marble surface, she claims it is just a pause on the eviction. Trent let out a condescending chuckle. He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, pulling the faux crocodile folder toward him. It is a standard asset management protocol, Kendra. You see, when dealing with complex family estates, it is best to consolidate control under someone with actual financial literacy. Your mother is distressed. Aaliyah is distressed. I am simply stepping in to restructure the debt and assume managerial oversight. I looked at him blankly, playing the exact role he expected me to play. I was the ignorant, out-of-her-depth woman. Managerial oversight, I repeated. What does that mean for the deed to my property? Trent sighed heavily, rolling his eyes as if explaining basic math to a toddler. It means the deed will be temporarily transferred into a family trust that I manage. It protects the asset. It keeps the house in the family name. I will handle the taxes, the maintenance overhead, and the corporate accounts linked to the property. You just sign on the dotted line, step back, and let the adults handle the heavy lifting. So you want me to give you the house, I said, keeping my voice soft and hesitant. I am protecting the house. Trent snapped his patience, wearing dangerously thin. His true colors were bubbling right to the surface. Look, Kendra, you got lucky. You bought a couple of buildings, and you think you are some kind of mogul. But you do not understand how generational wealth actually works. You are a ghetto girl who stumbled into some money, and now you are weaponizing it against your own mother out of sheer jealousy. Aaliyah gasped softly, but she did not contradict him. She just stared at her lap, entirely complicit in his racist degradation of her own sister. A ghetto girl, I repeated, letting the recording system capture every single syllable of his slur. Yes, Trent sneered, his face turning a blotchy red. You have zero class. You show up to a family dinner and threaten to throw your own parents on the street. That is not how civilized people operate. That is why I am taking control. Once you sign this deed over to my trust, I am going to leverage the equity in that house to cover some immediate market liabilities I have. Then I am going to access the corporate operating account attached to this property and bleed out the excess capital to restructure my own portfolio. That is how real business works. I extract the value, I stabilize my assets, and your parents get to stay in their home. Everybody wins. But I need your signature right now to bypass the corporate red tape. I stared at him. It was almost too easy. He had just confessed to conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion, and corporate embezzlement, all while casually dropping racist remarks in a fully recorded corporate facility. He had laid out his entire criminal enterprise step by step, assuming I was too stupid to understand that he had just handed me the keys to his prison cell. I let a long, heavy silence fill the room. I looked at Aaliyah, who was nodding vigorously, silently begging me to just comply. I looked back at Trent, who was tapping a gold pen against the folder, waiting for my submission. "You are right, Trent," I said, my voice quiet, adopting the tone of a defeated, broken woman. "I do not know how to handle this kind of pressure. The family is falling apart. I just want the fighting to stop." Trent smirked, a greasy, victorious smile spreading across his face. "Exactly. Leave the heavy lifting to me. Just sign right here on the bottom of page 4, and right here on the addendum." He slid the folder across the desk and held out his expensive gold pen. I took the pen. I looked down at the fraudulent quitclaim deed. I hovered the ink over the signature line. In a legally binding real estate transfer, a signature must match the authorized individual on the corporate charter. I pressed the pen to the paper. I did not write my name. I did not write Kendra. I wrote a massive, looping, cartoonish scribble that vaguely resembled the words Mickey Mouse followed by a giant smiley face. I signed the addendum with an equally ridiculous jagged line that spelled out "void void." It was the kind of signature a first grader would use on a permission slip. It was entirely hilariously and legally non-binding. I closed the folder sharply and slid it back across the marble desk. Trent snatched it up with greedy, trembling hands. He was so high on his own adrenaline, so drunk on the illusion of his supreme white authority, that he did not even glance at the signature line. He just shoved the documents into his briefcase and stood up, buttoning his tight suit jacket. "Good choice, Kendra," he said, looking down his nose at me. "I will have my associates file this with the county clerk by the end of the week. Do not contact your parents. Do not contact Aaliyah. I am handling all family communications from this point forward. You stay in your lane." Aaliyah stood up, looking visibly relieved. She shot me a pathetic, triumphant little smile. "Thank you, Kendra. You did the right thing. We will invite you over for the holidays once everything calms down." "I look forward to it," I said, keeping my hands folded on the desk. Trent grabbed Aaliyah by the arm and marched her out of my office. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them. I sat in the sudden quiet of my office for exactly 3 seconds. Then the side door connecting to my private legal suite swung open. Tasha walked in holding a tablet displaying the live feed of the security cameras. She was laughing so hard she had to lean against the wall for support. "Did you actually draw a smiley face on a multi-million-dollar property deed?" Tasha wheezed, wiping a tear of pure joy from the corner of her eye. "I gave him a masterpiece," I replied, a slow, dangerous smile finally breaking across my face. "Did the cameras catch the audio?" "Crystal clear," Tasha confirmed, tapping the screen to save the encrypted file directly to a secure external server. "We have him calling you a ghetto girl. We have him openly admitting his plan to leverage the house to pay off his personal liabilities. We have him confessing to his intent to drain Apex Holdings' operating accounts. He just committed multiple federal offenses on camera, and your sister sat right next to him as an active accomplice." I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the street below. I watched Trent and Aaliyah emerge from the lobby doors strutting down the sidewalk like they had just conquered the world. Trent was gesturing wildly, clearly bragging to his wife about how easily he had intimidated me. "He is going to take that document to the county clerk," I said, watching them disappear around the corner. "He is going to try to file a deed signed by a cartoon character. And the clerk is going to reject it immediately for fraudulent execution," Tasha added, stepping up beside me. "Which leaves him with a rejected deed, zero leverage, and absolutely no way to pay off the debts he owes. He is going to panic." "Let him panic," I said, turning away from the glass. "They wanted to play dirty. Now they have to deal with the mud. Prepare the eviction notices for the first of the month, Tasha. I want them delivered publicly." The trap had been sprung. The jaws had snapped shut. Trent and Aaliyah were officially dead in the water, and they had absolutely no idea they were already drowning. The 48 hours following Trent and Aaliyah's departure from my office were quiet. It was the calm before the digital storm. Trent had undoubtedly marched back to my parents' house, slammed my counterfeit signature on the dining room table, and declared himself the supreme savior of the family. I could picture the scene perfectly. My mother weeping tears of joy, Aaliyah looking at her unemployed husband as if he were a conquering hero, and my father sitting in the corner nursing his bruised ego while watching another man claim control over his household. They thought they had won. They truly believed they had outsmarted a multi-million-dollar holding company and a seasoned commercial real estate developer with a piece of paper signed by a cartoon character. Their arrogance required an audience. It always did. By Thursday evening, my phone began vibrating continuously against the marble island in my kitchen. I was preparing a light dinner, enjoying a glass of sparkling water, when Tasha's name flashed across the screen. I answered the call, putting her on speaker. "Are you logged into Facebook?" Tasha asked. Her voice was a mixture of absolute disgust and giddy anticipation. "I do not use Facebook, Tasha. You know my social media presence is strictly limited to corporate acquisitions and vetted press releases." "Log in right now," she commanded. "I am sending you a direct link. Your mother and sister are currently hosting a live broadcast to the entire First Mount Zion Baptist Church congregation and half the local country club. You are going to want to see this." I wiped my hands on a towel, grabbed my iPad, and clicked the link Tasha had just forwarded. The screen loaded, bringing up a live video feed that already had over 400 active viewers. There they were. Valerie and Aaliyah were sitting side by side on the expensive cream-colored sofa in my parents' living room, the living room of the house that I owned, the house that my corporate funds had saved from foreclosure. They were dressed in modest, muted colors, the universal uniform for staging a public sympathy tour. My mother was clutching a crumpled tissue, dabbing delicately at the corners of her eyes to ensure she did not ruin her mascara. Aaliyah sat close to her, rubbing Valerie's shoulder in a display of profound manufactured daughterly devotion. "We just want to thank everyone for your prayers," Valerie said to the camera, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "I know there have been rumors circulating since our Sunday dinner. Many of you reached out after Brother Thomas and Sister Jenkins expressed their concerns. We felt it was time to address our community directly." I leaned against the kitchen island, watching the performance unfold. "The enemy works in insidious ways," Valerie continued, looking directly into the camera lens, with wide, sorrowful eyes. "Sometimes the devil uses our own flesh and blood to test our faith. As many of you know, my oldest daughter, Kendra, has always struggled. She has always harbored a deep, bitter jealousy toward her sister. We tried to love her through it. We prayed for her spirit. But this week, that jealousy turned into something dark and destructive." The comments section on the side of the screen was flying by. Church members were typing out prayer hands and variations of "Lord have mercy." Aaliyah took her cue perfectly. She leaned closer to the camera, looking both exhausted and impossibly pious. "Kendra came to our home on Sunday and tried to extort our parents," Aaliyah claimed, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. "She used a minor financial misunderstanding to demand outrageous sums of money. She threatened to throw our mother and father out onto the streets simply because she is unhappy with her own life choices. She cannot stand that I found a good, strong provider like Trent. She wanted to destroy my family out of pure spite." I took a slow sip of my water. They were not just lying. They were completely rewriting the narrative to weaponize our entire community against me. They were using the church, their elite social circles, and their fake respectability to brand me as a bitter, unhinged, angry black woman who attacked her own family out of marital jealousy. "But God is faithful," Valerie chimed back in, raising her tissue to the camera. "He sent us a protector. When Kendra tried to manipulate the corporate property managers to steal our home, my son-in-law, Trent, stepped up. He used his brilliant financial expertise to intervene. He marched right into that corporate office, faced down those executives, and legally stripped Kendra of her power." Aaliyah smiled, a smug, victorious expression breaking through her fake sadness. "Trent completely legally outsmarted her. He transferred the house into a secure family trust. He protected my parents. He protected our legacy. We are so blessed to have a man who knows how to handle complex wealth and defend his family from toxic, unstable people. I watched the video for another 60 seconds as they asked the congregation to please keep Kendra in their prayers because she is clearly battling demons. Then I closed the application and tossed the iPad onto the counter. "Are you recording this?" I asked Tasha over the speakerphone. "I have screen recorded the entire broadcast from 3 different devices," Tasha replied, the sound of her typing echoing through the phone. "I have also archived the comments section, the share list, and the timestamps. This is textbook defamation, Kendra. It is libel, it is slander, and it is a deliberate, orchestrated smear campaign intended to cause reputational damage to a corporate entity. We can sue them into absolute oblivion." "We are not suing them for a video, Tasha," I said, walking over to the refrigerator. "You are going to let them get away with this?" she asked, sounding genuinely shocked. "They are dragging your name through the mud to hundreds of people in your hometown." "Let them drag it," I replied calmly. "Let them post their tearful videos. Let them gather their prayer circles. Let them bask in the validation of all those gossiping church elders. They are digging their own graves, Tasha. Every single lie they tell publicly is going to make the eventual truth infinitely more devastating." Over the next 48 hours, the smear campaign escalated. Aaliyah took to her Instagram account, posting aesthetic, soft-focus photos of her and Trent standing in front of my house. The captions were long, sprawling paragraphs about surviving toxic family members and the importance of having a strong husband to protect your generational wealth. My personal cell phone began receiving text messages from extended family members I had not spoken to in years. Aunts and uncles sent me long, condescending paragraphs advising me to seek therapy, telling me I needed to repent for disrespecting my parents, and suggesting I find a church home to heal my bitter heart. Former high school classmates and local country club members sent me passive-aggressive messages offering their unsolicited prayers. I did not reply to a single one. I did not issue a statement. I did not take to social media to defend myself. In my world, you do not argue with clowns in a circus. You simply buy the tent and shut down the show. If I went online and tried to defend myself, I would be playing their game. I would look exactly like the angry, defensive, out-of-control woman they desperately needed me to be. I would be engaging in a petty public back and forth that cheapened my brand and my peace. Silence is the ultimate weapon of the truly powerful. When you know you hold all the cards, you do not need to scream across a crowded room to prove you are winning. You simply wait for the dealer to flip the deck. While they were busy curating their victim narrative online, I was busy executing real-world power. I authorized the final wire transfers for my new commercial plaza. I held virtual meetings with international investors. I went to the gym, drank my green juice, and slept a full 8 hours every single night. I was completely, fundamentally unbothered. Trent was currently running out of time. He had a fake deed that the county clerk was inevitably going to reject the moment it hit their desk. He had no job mounting credit card debt and a wife who was publicly bragging about his fictional financial prowess to an audience of hundreds. The walls were closing in on him rapidly, and he was too arrogant to even feel the temperature dropping. They wanted to use the community as their shield. They wanted to use the church to validate their theft. But they had forgotten the most important rule of staging a massive public lie. Eventually, the curtain has to fall. And when I brought the curtain down, I was going to make sure every single person who watched that video had a front row seat to their absolute destruction. The eviction notices were already drafted, printed on thick, heavy legal paper, and sitting in a sealed folder on my desk. The clock was ticking down to the first of the month. I just had to wait for the perfect moment to deliver them. The private intercom on my wall chimed a sharp, singular note. It was past 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. I pressed the communication button on the digital panel, expecting the night concierge to announce a late delivery from my assistant. Instead, his voice came through the speaker, laced with polite hesitation. "Ms. Kendra, your father is waiting in the lobby. He asked if you would grant him access. He says he does not have a phone to call you directly." I paused, my hand hovering over the glowing control screen. Desmond had never once visited my penthouse. He had never asked for my address, completely uninterested in the life I had built away from his patriarchal oversight. If he was standing in the lobby of a luxury high-rise late at night without a phone, something catastrophic had shifted in his reality. "Send him up," I instructed. I stood in the center of the foyer as the biometric elevator doors slid smoothly apart. The man who stepped out into my home was not the booming, prideful church elder who had carved the roast beef at Sunday dinner. Desmond looked physically diminished. The broad shoulders that usually carried his tailored suits were slumped. He wore a simple zip-up jacket over a plain shirt, and he held a thick, worn manila folder tightly against his chest. He looked around the expansive, dimly lit foyer, his eyes taking in the modern art, the custom lighting, and the sheer scale of the space. He did not say a word about the wealth. He simply looked at me, and I saw the absolute devastation in his eyes. "Come in, Dad," I said, keeping my voice even. I led him into the main living room. He refused my offer of a drink with a slow, heavy shake of his head. He sat down on the edge of the velvet sofa, looking entirely out of place, like a man who had just survived a shipwreck and found himself washed up on an unfamiliar shore. I sat in the armchair opposite him, waiting. I knew better than to prompt him. A proud man breaking down needs to do it at his own pace. I left my phone on the kitchen counter. Desmond began, his voice gravelly and exhausted. "Valerie has not stopped screaming since you walked out the door on Sunday. She and Aaliyah have been filming themselves crying, praying, calling everyone in the congregation, spinning a web of lies so thick I could not breathe in my own house. Trent has been pacing the floor, screaming into his phone at random lawyers. It is a madhouse, Kendra. A complete madhouse." I leaned back, resting my hands in my lap. "I warned you all. You chose to believe her narrative. I did." Desmond admitted, the confession costing him dearly. "I chose the path of least resistance. I let your mother run that house, and I let her dictate how we treated you. She convinced me you were tough, that you did not need us. She used the excuse that you were a strong black woman to justify ignoring you, while she coddled your sister into a state of total helplessness. I was blind, Kendra. I wanted the perfect family image so badly that I chose to look away from the rot eating away at our foundation. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry." I looked at my father. The apology was genuine. The regret radiating from him was palpable. But an apology does not erase decades of neglect, nor does it undo the damage caused by willful ignorance. "I appreciate your apology, Dad," I said calmly. "But I doubt you came all the way downtown late at night just to tell me you were wrong." Desmond closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, the sorrow had hardened into a sharp, bitter anger. He lifted the thick manila folder from his lap and placed it heavily on the glass coffee table between us. "After the dinner, I demanded that Valerie give me the paperwork for the second mortgage," he explained, his voice dropping into a harsh rasp. "She refused. She locked herself in the master bedroom. So I went into her home office. I took a hammer to the locked filing cabinet she always claimed was just for her church committee documents. I needed to see exactly how much debt she had tied my name to." He gestured to the folder. "I found the mortgage documents, but I found something else. Something much, much worse." I reached forward and pulled the folder toward me. I flipped it open. Inside was a chaotic stack of financial statements, credit reports, and banking records spanning over a decade. The logos of major platinum credit cards, premium retail accounts, and high-interest personal loans jumped off the pages. I pulled the first stack of statements toward the light. I looked at the name printed at the top of the billing address. It was my name. Kendra. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped to the next page. A platinum credit card with a $30,000 limit. The primary account holder was me. I checked the date the account was opened. It was exactly 1 month after my 18th birthday. I stared at the paper, the pieces of my past suddenly colliding with violent, sickening clarity. When I was 22 years old, fresh out of state school, and trying to secure my first commercial real estate loan to buy a dilapidated duplex, the bank had laughed me out of the office. They told me my credit score was completely destroyed. They said I had defaulted on massive retail accounts and personal loans. I had spent 5 agonizing years assuming I was the victim of a random data breach. I had to build my entire real estate empire using cash and predatory interest rates because my credit history was a toxic wasteland. I had eaten ramen noodles, worked 3 jobs, and clawed my way out of a financial hole I never dug. It was Valerie, I whispered, the realization sending a shockwave of ice-cold fury through my veins. My own mother stole my social security number the minute I turned 18. Desmond nodded, a tear slipping down his weathered cheek. She used your identity to fund Aaliyah's college lifestyle. The designer dorm furniture, the expensive car leases, the pageant dresses. She ruined your financial future before you even had a chance to start, just to make sure Aaliyah never had to hear the word no. I flipped through the stack of papers, my hands operating with mechanical precision, as my mind processed the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. But the dates on the most recent statements did not stop 10 years ago. I pulled a fresh stack of premium corporate credit card bills from the back of the folder. These accounts had been opened within the last 2 years. The credit limits were staggering, nearing $100,000. I checked the authorized users listed under my primary name. 2 names were printed in stark, undeniable black ink: Valerie and Trent. I looked up at my father. Trent is on these accounts. When Trent lost his job 6 months ago, Desmond explained, his voice vibrating with absolute disgust. Valerie panicked. She could not handle the idea of the church finding out her golden son-in-law was a broke, unemployed failure. So she handed Trent your stolen identity. She gave him the backdoor access to the fraudulent accounts she had established in your name. Trent has been taking out massive corporate credit cards under your identity to maintain his country club memberships, pay the lease on his luxury car, and fund Aaliyah's dead lifestyle brand. I set the papers down. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. Trent, the arrogant, entitled white man who had sat in my office and called me a ghetto girl. Trent, who had threatened to sue me for handling family wealth poorly. Trent was literally funding his entire fake privileged existence by committing identity theft against a black woman he openly despised. He was living off my stolen name. The audacity was no longer just insulting, it was criminal. I packed a bag, Desmond said, breaking the silence. It is in the trunk of my car. I am not going back to that house. I will not sleep under the same roof as a woman who would destroy her own flesh and blood for the sake of an illusion. I am filing for divorce, Kendra. I am completely done. He stood up from the sofa. He looked at the folders sitting on the glass table. I know you gave them until the 1st of the month, Desmond said, his voice steadying. I know you plan to evict them. But after seeing this, an eviction is too kind. They did not just disrespect you. They committed financial treason against you. Burn them to the ground, Kendra. Do whatever you have to do. You have my blessing. My father turned and walked toward the elevator. I did not stop him. We had crossed a threshold where comfort was no longer required. He stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut, leaving me completely alone with the undeniable proof of my family's ultimate betrayal. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up my phone. I dialed Tasha's private number. She answered on the second ring. Call the county sheriff, I instructed, my voice devoid of any emotion, cold as a drawn blade. Call the fraud division of the Financial Crimes Unit. Draft the official 30-day eviction notices. What happened? Tasha asked, instantly sensing the shift in my tone. The eviction is no longer just an eviction, I replied, looking down at Trent's name printed on the fraudulent credit card statement. It is going to be an execution. The countdown to the 1st of the month had officially begun. Trent and Aaliyah were preparing to throw a lavish garden party to celebrate their fake victory. They were going to pop champagne and toast to their stolen wealth. But they had absolutely no idea that I was about to walk through their front gates and dismantle their entire lives right in front of their elite, unbothered guests. The 1st of the month arrived on a Tuesday, carrying a crisp, brilliant afternoon sun that felt entirely too cheerful for the execution I was about to perform. Aaliyah and Trent had spared absolutely no expense for their grand celebration. They had mailed out embossed gold foil invitations declaring the event a financial independence garden party. They had invited the upper echelon of their country club network, the senior leadership of our church, and several potential investors for Trent's non-existent new business venture. They were popping champagne on the manicured back lawn of my property, toasting to their fraudulent victory, completely unaware that the ground beneath their designer shoes was about to cave in. I did not pull up to the estate quietly. I did not park down the street. I directed my driver to pull my black SUV directly into the center of the circular driveway, blocking in a row of luxury sedans. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing a tailored, double-breasted charcoal trench coat and dark sunglasses. Tasha emerged from the other side looking like a lethal weapon in a pristine, stark white pantsuit. Behind us, two separate vehicles pulled up, a marked county sheriff cruiser and a plain sedan. Deputy Collins, a seasoned officer with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped out of the cruiser and adjusted his utility belt. A private process server, a tall man holding a thick stack of manila envelopes, stepped out of the sedan and joined our formation. We did not knock. We simply opened the wrought iron side gates and walked in unison down the cobblestone path leading to the sprawling backyard. The scene was a masterclass in stolen opulence. A string quartet played classical music on the patio. Waitstaff in crisp white shirts circulated with trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. A massive floral arch framed the outdoor seating area. Aaliyah was wearing a stunning silk dress that I now knew was purchased using my hijacked credit score. Valerie was holding court near the catered buffet, smiling and accepting compliments from Sister Jenkins and Brother Thomas. Standing on the raised stone terrace overlooking the crowd was Trent. He was holding a microphone and a glass of champagne right in the middle of delivering a boastful, arrogant toast about the importance of generational wealth and securing the family legacy. He was so caught up in the sound of his own voice that he did not even notice the music faltering as the string quartet spotted the uniformed police officer walking across the lawn. I did not wait for him to finish his speech. I walked directly through the crowd of elite whispering guests. The sea of pastel dresses and tailored suits naturally parted for me, sensing the absolute unyielding authority radiating from our group. Trent stopped mid-sentence. His microphone lowered slowly as his eyes locked onto me. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine irritation. He looked at Tasha, then at the police officer, and his jaw tightened. He assumed this was a desperate last-minute intimidation tactic. He still thought he held the winning hand. Kendra, Trent announced over the microphone, his voice echoing across the silent backyard. I told you very clearly that you were no longer welcome on this property. We have filed the paperwork. You have zero legal standing here. I am going to have to ask you to leave before I have you escorted out for trespassing. A collective gasp rippled through the garden. Valerie dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the stone pavers, but she did not even look down. She stared at the sheriff, her face draining of all color. She realized instantly that Desmond was nowhere to be found and that the protective bubble of her marriage was gone. I stopped right at the base of the terrace steps. I took off my sunglasses and folded them slowly. You filed the paperwork, I asked, my voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the party. You took the quitclaim deed to the county clerk, Trent. I had my associates file it on Friday. Trent sneered, puffing out his chest for the benefit of his wealthy friends watching the exchange. You are trespassing on a family trust. Now leave. I looked at Tasha. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the stone. Actually, Trent, Tasha began, her voice ringing out with crystal-clear, mocking precision. The county clerk rejected your filing on Friday afternoon. As it turns out, the State Housing Authority does not recognize the transfer of multi-million-dollar commercial assets when the managing director's signature line is signed by Mickey Mouse. The crowd erupted in a shockwave of confused whispers. Aaliyah let out a strangled, horrified sound, covering her mouth with both hands. Trent froze. His eyes widened as the devastating realization slammed into him. He had been so arrogant, so eager to steal the house, that he had never even bothered to look at the ink on the paper. You committed a felony, Trent, I stated, stepping up onto the first stone stair. You attempted to defraud a corporate entity, and you did it on high-definition video in my office. But we are not here to discuss your impending federal indictment today. Today we are strictly handling the real estate. I turned to the process server and gave a sharp nod. The process server stepped around me, walking directly up to the terrace. He handed the first thick envelope to Trent. He turned and handed the second envelope to a trembling Aaliyah. He then walked down the steps, approaching a paralyzed Valerie, and pressed the third envelope directly against her chest until she reflexively grabbed it. "You have all been legally served," the process server announced loudly, fulfilling his legal obligation. "What is this?" Trent demanded, his voice cracking as he ripped open the envelope and pulled out the heavy legal documents. "That is an official 30-day notice to vacate," I replied, making sure every single church elder and country club investor heard my words. "You are being formally evicted from my property. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your stolen designer clothes, your fake lifestyle brand, and your unemployed husband and vacate my premises." Trent crumpled the paper in his fist, his face turning a furious, volatile shade of red. "You cannot do this. We will fight this in court. We will tie this house up in litigation for years. You are a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin us." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that sliced through the garden. "Fight it with what money, Trent?" I asked, stepping up onto the terrace to stand inches away from him. "Your corporate credit cards have been frozen. The accounts you and my mother fraudulently opened using my stolen Social Security number have been locked and reported to the Financial Crimes Division. You have zero income. You have been unemployed for 6 months. You do not have the capital to hire a paralegal, let alone fight a billionaire holding company in civil court." Sister Jenkins, standing near the buffet table, audibly gasped and clutched Brother Thomas's arm. The church gossips were already pulling out their phones, typing furiously. The pristine, holy reputation Valerie had spent decades cultivating was being vaporized in real time. Valerie suddenly shoved her way through the crowd, tears streaming down her face, abandoning all decorum. "Kendra, please," she sobbed, reaching out toward me. "You cannot do this in front of everyone. We are your family. Your father left me. He packed his bags and left. Please do not throw me out on the street. I will do whatever you want." I looked down at the woman who had stolen my identity to fund a fake life for her golden child. "You made your choice when you handed a broke, racist fraud the keys to my credit history," I told her, my voice devoid of any pity. "You can move into a shelter for all I care. Your name is on the eviction notice." Trent suddenly lunged forward, raising his arm in a blind, humiliated rage. "You shut your mouth!" he roared. Before he could even complete the step, Deputy Collins was on the terrace. The sheriff placed a heavy, authoritative hand directly on the butt of his service weapon and stepped squarely between Trent and me. "Take one more step, sir, and you will be leaving this garden in handcuffs." Deputy Collins ordered, his voice carrying the absolute weight of the law. "Back away immediately." Trent hit an invisible wall. The reality of a uniformed officer commanding him to stand down shattered the last remaining pieces of his white privilege. He raised his hands defensively and took 3 slow steps backward, his chest heaving with defeated, impotent rage. I looked at the 3 of them. Aaliyah was sobbing hysterically into her hands, her mascara running down her cheeks, the perfect garden party host completely broken. Valerie was leaning against a cocktail table, shaking violently as the whispers of her church community surrounded her like a swarm of bees. And Trent was standing trapped by the law, publicly outed as a broke, unemployed fraud. "You have 30 days to pack your fake life into boxes," I told them, delivering my final verdict to the quiet, stunned crowd. "If you cause a single dollar of damage to this estate, or if you attempt to take a single fixture from my property, I will have you arrested for theft on top of the federal fraud charges currently being drafted by my legal team." I turned my back on them. I did not wait for a response. I walked down the terrace steps, past the shattered champagne glass, and straight through the center of the silent garden. Tasha walked proudly beside me, and the sheriff followed close behind. We exited through the wrought iron gates, leaving the catering, the string quartet, and the complete destruction of their false empire behind us. The eviction was in motion, but I knew Trent's desperation. A man backed into a corner with his reputation destroyed would try one last nuclear option to save himself. I knew exactly what he was planning next, and I was already setting the stage for his final permanent downfall. The fallout from the garden party sent Trent into a state of absolute frantic desperation. When a narcissist is backed into a corner and stripped of his false authority, he does not reflect or apologize. He doubles down. With the 30-day eviction clock ticking loudly in his ear, and the Financial Crimes Division slowly closing the net around the fraudulent credit accounts, Trent realized he needed a massive influx of cash. He needed millions, and he needed it immediately to pay off his debts and flee the sinking ship he had created. He decided on the nuclear option. Exactly 2 weeks after I handed him his eviction notice, Tasha walked into my office and tossed a thick, glossy invitation onto my desk. It was printed on heavy black cardstock with embossed gold lettering. Trent and Aaliyah were hosting a black-tie charity gala and investment summit at the Grand Solstice Hotel. The Grand Solstice was the crown jewel of the downtown hospitality scene. It was a historic, ultra-luxury hotel that catered exclusively to visiting dignitaries, high-net-worth individuals, and elite venture capitalists. According to the arrogant, overly verbose invitation, Trent was launching a brand-new boutique real estate investment fund. He was inviting the wealthiest investors in the city to get in on the ground floor of his visionary portfolio. To secure their trust, he was pledging the sprawling suburban estate he falsely claimed to own as collateral for their initial seed money investments. He was trying to execute a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme in a tuxedo. He intended to collect the wire transfers from these gullible investors and vanish before the county sheriff physically dragged him and my sister out of my house at the end of the month. It was a bold, desperate, and incredibly reckless plan. It also relied on one massive, fatal oversight. Trent did not read the financial trades. If he did, he would have known that the management group operating the Grand Solstice Hotel had been quietly acquired in a leveraged buyout during the previous fiscal quarter. The parent company that now owned the hotel, the building, the staff, and the audiovisual equipment was Apex Holdings. He booked his fraudulent high-stakes heist inside my own living room. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct line for Victor, the general manager of the Grand Solstice. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and deferential. I asked him to pull the event manifest for the so-called investment summit scheduled in the main ballroom. Within 3 minutes, the entire digital file was sitting in my secure inbox. I opened the file and laughed. Trent had paid the exorbitant, non-refundable venue deposit using a predatory high-interest bridge loan. He was quite literally betting his last borrowed dime on this scam. But the most amusing part of the file was the media attachment. Victor had forwarded the digital slideshow presentation Trent submitted to the hotel's audiovisual team to be projected during his keynote speech. Tasha leaned over my shoulder as I clicked through the slides. Trent had created a beautiful, glossy presentation showcasing his supposed real estate acumen. The problem was that every single commercial building, luxury residential complex, and downtown high-rise featured in his pitch deck belonged to me. He had literally right-clicked and saved the public images from the Apex Holdings website. He was going to stand on a stage and try to sell my empire to a room full of millionaires. "We are not shutting this down," I told Tasha, a cold, sharp thrill rushing through my veins. "We are going to let him throw his party. We are going to let him fill that ballroom with every rich, arrogant investor he can find. And then we are going to lock the doors." The night of the gala arrived, draped in the kind of crisp, clear elegance that made the city skyline sparkle. I did not enter through the front doors. I did not need to stand in line at the velvet ropes or check my name off a guest list managed by a frantic event planner. I was the owner. I arrived through the private subterranean executive entrance. Tasha walked beside me. She wore a razor-sharp, asymmetrical black pantsuit that looked ready for a boardroom or a funeral. I wore a custom floor-length emerald silk gown that commanded the air around it. We stepped into the private service elevator and rode it directly to the VIP mezzanine overlooking the grand ballroom. The space below was a masterclass in stolen prestige. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables draped in black silk. Waitstaff in pristine white coats circulated with trays of expensive champagne and caviar. Aaliyah was down there playing her part to perfection. She wore a glittering silver gown, schmoozing with older wealthy men, and their heavily Botoxed wives, laughing at their jokes and pointing admiringly toward her husband. She was selling the illusion of the wealthy, stable, successful couple. She was the bait. Trent stood near the grand stage, adjusting his bow tie, his face glistening with a thin sheen of nervous sweat. He was holding a glass of whiskey, talking rapidly to a group of venture capitalists. He looked like a man standing on a landmine, terrified to shift his weight. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine balcony, looking down at the spectacle. Victor, the hotel general manager, approached me quietly from the shadows. He handed me a master tablet connected directly to the ballroom's main audiovisual control booth. The presentation is queued up exactly as he requested. Ms. Kendra, Victor whispered, his posture perfectly rigid. My security team is stationed at every exit. The doors will remain closed until you give the signal. No one leaves without your authorization. Thank you, Victor, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on Trent. Tell the AV booth to stand by. When he gets to the slide featuring the downtown plaza, I will take over the feed from this tablet. Victor bowed slightly and melted back into the shadows of the corridor. Tasha leaned against the brass railing of the balcony, swirling a glass of sparkling water. She looked down at Trent with the kind of clinical, detached disgust a scientist reserves for a particularly repulsive insect. He actually thinks he is going to walk out of here with millions of dollars in seed money, Tasha murmured, shaking her head. He really thinks these old money investors are not going to run a background check the moment they leave this room. He is not planning to stick around long enough for a background check, I replied, my voice a quiet, dangerous hum. He wants them to sign the preliminary commitment letters tonight and wire the good faith deposits by tomorrow morning. He wants to take the cash and run before the sheriff kicks down his door next week. A sudden hush fell over the ballroom as the string quartet faded out. The lights dimmed, leaving only the dramatic spotlights illuminating the main stage. The gentle clinking of silverware and crystal glasses died down as the wealthy attendees turned their attention toward the front of the room. Aaliyah stepped up to the microphone, radiating false humility. Thank you all for joining us tonight, she purred, her voice echoing perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system I had paid to install 2 years ago. We are so blessed to share this evening with you. My husband Trent has worked tirelessly to build a portfolio that reflects not just financial growth, but true generational stability. Please welcome the founder and CEO of our new venture. The room erupted in polite, affluent applause. Trent handed his whiskey glass to a waiter, smoothed the lapels of his rented tuxedo, and strode confidently up the stairs to the stage. He took the microphone, flashing a practiced, brilliant smile that hid the absolute panic rotting his insides. He had no idea that I was standing 30 feet above him, holding a tablet that contained the digital execution of his entire life. I rested my hand on the cold brass railing. The game was over. It was time to show the investors exactly what kind of man was asking for their money. Trent cleared his throat, adjusting the cuffs of his rented tuxedo. He gripped the microphone, projecting the ultimate facade of a seasoned Wall Street titan. Ladies and gentlemen! Trent began, his voice dripping with unearned confidence as it echoed across the crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom. True wealth is not simply about capital. It is about vision. It is about identifying untamed potential and executing aggressive, stabilized growth. Tonight, I am inviting you to join a fund built on absolute, unshakable foundations. He clicked a small remote in his hand. The massive LED screen behind him flickered to life, illuminating the dark, elegant room. I looked down from the VIP mezzanine as the first slide appeared on the screen. It was a stunning, high-definition drone photograph of a gleaming luxury high-rise in the financial district. My high-rise. The very building where I currently lived and operated my corporate headquarters. As you can see, Trent boasted, gesturing broadly toward the image of my property. Our flagship acquisition represents the pinnacle of modern urban development. We secured this asset through aggressive market restructuring, and it currently yields a return that outpaces any competing fund in the region. A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Wealthy venture capitalists and seasoned angel investors nodded, taking notes in their leather-bound folios. Aaliyah sat at the front table, beaming with pride, playing the role of the supportive, affluent wife to absolute perfection. She truly believed they had pulled it off. Trent clicked the remote again. The screen transitioned to a sweeping photograph of a massive downtown commercial plaza. It was the exact $30 million acquisition I had finalized just days ago. This plaza is the cornerstone of our retail expansion strategy. Trent lied smoothly, pacing the stage like a Silicon Valley visionary. I personally oversaw the consolidation of this property. I looked at the tablet resting in my hand. My thumb hovered over the master override button. The anticipation was a cold electric current running straight down my spine. Trent had walked into my hotel, hooked his laptop into my audiovisual system, and attempted to sell my life's work to a room full of strangers. He thought he was the smartest man in the city. I pressed the button. The transition was instant and brutal. The classical music piping softly through the ballroom speakers cut out with a sharp, heavy click. The glowing image of my commercial plaza vanished, replaced by pitch-black darkness. Trent tapped his remote, his confident smile wavering for a fraction of a second. "Just a minor technical difficulty," he assured the crowd, tapping the clicker harder against his palm. "Bear with us, folks." The massive LED screen lit up again. But it was not a glossy PowerPoint slide. It was the razor-sharp, high-definition security footage from my corporate office. The image displayed Trent sitting arrogantly in my leather guest chair, his ankle crossed over his knee, looking down his nose at the camera. Aaliyah was sitting right next to him, nodding compliantly. Then the audio kicked in. It was perfectly equalized, booming through the ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system with deafening clarity. "You are a ghetto girl who stumbled into some money," Trent's recorded voice roared across the silent ballroom. "You have zero class. You show up to a family dinner and threaten to throw your own parents on the street." The ballroom went deathly quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic collision. The investors froze in their seats, silverware stopped clinking. On the stage, Trent whipped around, staring up at the massive screen in absolute paralyzing horror. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. He dropped his remote. It clattered loudly against the wooden stage floor. The video kept playing, relentless and perfectly timed. "Once you sign this deed over to my trust," the recorded. Trent continued bragging to the hidden camera. "I am going to leverage the equity in that house to cover some immediate market liabilities I have. Then, I am going to access the corporate operating account attached to this property and bleed out the excess capital to restructure my own portfolio. That is how real business works. I extract the value, I stabilize my assets, and your parents get to stay in their home." Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Chairs scraped violently against the polished floor as investors stood up in outrage. Wealthy businessmen immediately pulled out their cell phones, dialing their legal teams and wealth managers. Women gasped in disgust, turning their glaring, furious eyes toward Aaliyah. Aaliyah let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She threw her hands over her face, shrinking into her chair as her entire social standing evaporated into thin air. She looked wildly toward the exit doors, ready to sprint out of the room, but she froze when she saw the security guards. 4 massive men in tailored black suits had stepped out from the shadows, forming a solid, impenetrable wall in front of the exit doors. No one was leaving. "Shut it down!" Trent screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. He frantically ran to the side of the stage, clawing at the thick black cables running along the baseboards, desperately trying to rip them out of the wall. "Shut the screen off right now!" I tapped the tablet a second time. The video feed cut out. It was immediately replaced by a bright, glaring slide. It was a high-resolution scan of Trent's termination letter from his former financial firm, clearly citing gross incompetence and failure to meet ethical standards. The date of termination was highlighted in bright red ink, proving he had been entirely unemployed for 6 months. 5 seconds later, the slide shifted automatically. The screen displayed the official foreclosure notices and the massive fraudulent credit card statements Valerie and Trent had taken out in my name. 5 seconds later, the final slide appeared. It was the rejected quitclaim deed. The document was blown up to massive proportions, highlighting the signature line where I had drawn my cartoonish looping signature. Stamped diagonally across the document in heavy red ink was the official county clerk's seal reading, "Rejected for fraudulent filing." The visual execution was absolute perfection. Trent was not just exposed as a fraud. He was exposed as a broke, incompetent, racist criminal who had attempted to steal from a black woman and failed spectacularly. I handed the tablet back to the general manager. I turned to Tasha, who was smiling like a shark that had just caught the scent of blood in the water. "Let us go down," I said. We left the mezzanine and descended the grand, sweeping staircase leading directly to the ballroom floor. As my heels clicked against the marble steps, the sea of angry, wealthy investors turned to look at me. They saw the custom emerald gown. They saw the absolute terrifying confidence radiating from my posture. They naturally parted, clearing a wide, unobstructed path for me down the center aisle. They recognized real power when they saw it. I walked straight toward the stage. Trent was trembling uncontrollably. He was backed into the corner of the stage, breathing heavily, looking like a trapped rat waiting for the final strike. I walked up the carpeted steps. I stood right in front of him. I reached out and smoothly slid the microphone right out of his sweaty, shaking hand. He did not even try to resist. He was entirely broken. I turned my back on him and faced the furious crowd. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice ringing out with calm, undeniable authority. "My name is Kendra. I am the founder and managing director of Apex Holdings. I am also the sole owner of the commercial properties you just saw illegally displayed in that fraudulent pitch deck. Furthermore, I am the owner of this hotel." A collective gasp echoed through the room. The murmurs of outrage turned into stunned, respectful silence as they realized they were standing in the presence of the actual Titan. "The man cowering behind me is currently unemployed, drowning in a mountain of debt, and actively under investigation for federal wire fraud and identity theft." I continued, my gaze sweeping across the wealthy audience. "There is no boutique investment fund. There is no real estate portfolio. He was planning to take your good faith deposits tonight and flee the state to avoid his impending eviction. You were all invited here to fund his escape plan." Aaliyah buried her face in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably against the banquet table. Her fake, pristine life was officially dead buried under the weight of a public humiliation she would never, ever outrun. "You set me up!" Trent wheezed from behind me. His voice was a pathetic, strangled whisper. "You set me up." I turned my head slowly, looking over my shoulder at the man who had called me a ghetto girl and tried to steal the roof over my parents' heads. I looked at him with absolute freezing contempt. "You wanted to play with the big dogs, Trent," I said, making sure the microphone caught every single word of his final destruction. As the final word left my lips, the heavy brass double doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding crash. 4 uniformed police officers marched down the center aisle, flanked by 2 plainclothes detectives holding official warrants. The investors stepped back, pulling their evening gowns and tailored suit jackets out of the way, treating the police presence like a biohazard containment unit. Tasha met the detectives halfway down the aisle. She did not miss a single beat. She handed the lead detective a pristine, thick leather binder containing the flash drive of the security footage, the rejected quitclaim deed, and the towering stack of fraudulent credit card statements Trent and my mother had opened in my name. Trent tried to scramble backward off the stage, his eyes darting frantically toward the service exit behind the velvet curtains. But my security team simply grabbed him by the shoulders of his rented tuxedo and tossed him directly into the waiting arms of the police. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut over his wrists was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The lead detective read Trent his Miranda rights, his voice a flat bureaucratic drone that completely stripped Trent of whatever lingering superiority he thought he possessed. Trent did not fight back. He did not yell. He just hung his head, his shoulders shaking as he began to sob right there in the middle of the ballroom. The wealthy investors he had tried to swindle watched him with absolute unmasked disgust. Aaliyah scrambled up from her table, her silver gown catching under her heel as she stumbled toward the police. She reached out for her husband, screaming his name, but a female officer immediately blocked her path. "Ma'am, you need to step back," the officer commanded, holding up a firm hand. We have a warrant for his arrest regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and attempted extortion. We will also be contacting you tomorrow morning for a formal interview regarding your complicity in these financial crimes. I highly suggest you do not leave the city limits." Aaliyah froze. The reality of her situation slammed into her like a freight train. Her husband was going to federal prison. The stolen money was gone. The fake business was dead. She was completely destitute, and she was officially a person of interest in a massive federal investigation. She turned away from the officers and looked up at me. I was still standing on the edge of the stage, looking down at her from my elevated position. The contrast between us was absolute. I was bathed in the warm, golden stage lights, wrapped in custom emerald silk, holding the total power of my empire. Aaliyah was standing in the shadows of the ballroom floor, her mascara running down her face in thick black rivers, her fake aristocratic persona entirely obliterated. She rushed the edge of the stage, gripping the wooden trim with trembling, desperate hands. "Kendra, please!" Aaliyah sobbed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical whine. "You have to help me. They are going to put me in jail. I do not have a lawyer. I do not have any money. Trent locked me out of the checking accounts. You have corporate lawyers. You have Tasha. Please, Kendra, we are sisters. You cannot let me go to prison. I will do anything. I will scrub your floors. I will publicly apologize to the church. Just write a check for my defense attorney. Please." I looked down at the golden child. I looked at the woman who had spent 32 years taking my parents' money, mocking my independence, and actively plotting to steal the roof over my head. She wanted me to open my checkbook to save her from the consequences of her own malice. I leaned down slightly, bringing my face closer to hers, making sure my voice carried the absolute freezing weight of my final verdict. "You are twice the woman I am, remember," I told her, my tone devoid of a single drop of pity. "Figure it out." I stood back up, turned my back on her weeping face, and walked gracefully down the side stairs of the stage. Tasha was waiting for me at the bottom, holding 2 fresh glasses of champagne she had commandeered from a passing waiter. We clinked our glasses together as the police marched Trent out of the ballroom in handcuffs. The crowd of investors actually applauded as the doors swung shut behind him. 30 days later, the first of the month arrived, and the eviction was executed with flawless legal precision. The county sheriff arrived at the suburban estate right on schedule to oversee the lockout. Valerie had spent the entire month calling every relative, every church deacon, and every old friend trying to secure a loan to fight the eviction. Every single one of them had hung up on her. The video of Trent's arrest at the gala had circulated through the community like wildfire. No one wanted to be associated with a family of exposed fraudsters. Desmond kept his word. The day after the gala, he formally filed for divorce. He packed a single suitcase, handed his wedding ring to Valerie, and walked out the front door without looking back. I had quietly secured a modest, clean, 1-bedroom apartment for him in a quiet part of town. I paid the first and last month's rent, but I made my terms explicitly clear. I would not pay his utilities. I would not cover his groceries. He had a civil service pension, and he needed to learn how to live on it. He accepted the terms with humble gratitude, finally understanding that true respect requires independence. Valerie and Aaliyah were not so lucky. With all their fraudulent credit cards frozen and their assets seized by the federal authorities investigating Trent, they had absolutely nothing. The fake lifestyle brand was immediately liquidated by creditors. Valerie's precious curated designer furniture was hauled out of my house by a moving crew and placed into a cheap storage locker she could barely afford. They were forced to move into a cramped, run-down 2-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city, far away from their beloved country club and their elite gated communities. Because Trent had left them drowning in massive legal fees and restitution debts, they had no choice but to enter the workforce. Valerie, the woman who had spent decades looking down her nose at working-class people, was forced to take a minimum wage job folding clothes at a discount retail store. She spent her days organizing clearance racks, hiding in the stockroom whenever a member of her old church congregation walked through the sliding glass doors. Aaliyah, stripped of her designer bags and her arrogant white husband, ended up working a cash register at a local grocery store. The delicate, fragile golden child finally had to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet for 8 hours a day, scanning barcodes just to keep the lights on in her dingy apartment. I did not feel sorry for them. I did not check in on them. I simply changed the locks on my suburban estate, hired a premium landscaping crew to maintain the grounds, and put the property on the market for a massive profit. 6 months later, I sat on the expansive glass balcony of my downtown penthouse. The evening air was warm, carrying the faint, energetic hum of the city below. The skyline sparkled with a million lights, and several of the tallest buildings in my direct line of sight belonged entirely to Apex Holdings. Tasha sat in the lounge chair across from me, reviewing the quarterly earnings report for my latest commercial acquisition. She looked up, a brilliant, satisfied smile crossing her face. "We closed the quarter up 32%. Tasha announced, setting her tablet down on the glass coffee table. "And the State Housing Authority just approved our permits for the new luxury development project. You are officially untouchable, Kendra." I smiled, raising my glass of vintage champagne to the glittering skyline. I took a slow sip, letting the crisp, dry bubbles settle on my tongue. I looked out over the city I had conquered. The air up here was thin, clean, and utterly peaceful. There were no screaming matches. There were no manipulative demands for my hard-earned capital. There was no one telling me I needed to shrink myself to make them feel comfortable. Cutting my family off was not a tragedy. It was a surgical removal of an infection that had been slowly killing me for 35 years. Society loves to tell Black women that we have to carry the weight of our families on our backs. They tell us that blood is thicker than water, that we have to forgive the unforgivable because family is everything. They expect us to endure disrespect, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation, all in the name of loyalty. They demand that we build the table, cook the food, and then sit quietly on the floor while our abusers feast. I reject that narrative entirely. True family does not demand that you set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. Blood does not entitle anyone to your peace, your sanity, or your empire. Respect is the bare minimum currency required to sit at my table, and if you cannot afford the entry fee, you will be evicted from my life without a second thought. I built this throne with my own 2 hands. I laid every brick, I secured every contract, and I survived every attempt to tear me down. I am not half the woman my sister is. I am the entire architect of my own destiny. So I have to ask you, when are you going to stop accepting the bare minimum from people who share your last name? When are you going to realize that your independence is your greatest weapon? When are you going to finally find the courage to hand out your own eviction notices, claim your worth, and build a throne of your own? The silence that followed my words was absolute. Aaliyah stared up at me from the ballroom floor, her perfectly contoured face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. For 32 years, she had relied on the safety net of our parents' enabling and my forced sacrifices. Now, staring at the cold, unyielding reality of my refusal, that safety net evaporated into the chilled air of the Grand Solstice ballroom. She reached out a trembling hand, her silver designer gown pooling around her knees like shattered glass. But I had already turned my back. I walked down the velvet-lined stairs of the stage, my emerald silk gown trailing behind me. The sea of wealthy investors, the very people Trent had tried to swindle just minutes prior, parted for me with a profound, almost fearful respect. Tasha was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, holding 2 flutes of vintage champagne she had effortlessly commandeered from a stunned waiter. She handed one to me, her eyes gleaming with the precise, lethal satisfaction of a corporate attorney who had just won the Super Bowl of litigation. "To the architect of her own demise," Tasha murmured, raising her glass. "To the eviction," I replied, clinking my crystal against hers. Behind us, the chaos was swift and methodical. The federal detectives did not care about Aaliyah's tears or her frantic, breathless explanations. They ordered her to her feet, informing her that as a co-signer on the fraudulent corporate credit accounts, she was required to accompany them to the precinct for a formal recorded interview. I took a slow sip of my champagne as I watched 2 female officers flank my sister, marching her out the service exit to avoid the flashing cameras of the local press, who were already gathering in the lobby. The golden child, stripped of her pedestal, was being escorted out through the service doors like common trash. By the time Tasha and I exited the hotel through the private executive garage, the crisp downtown air felt entirely different. It tasted like absolute boundless liberation. The destruction of Trent and Aaliyah's fraudulent empire did not happen slowly. It happened with the terrifying, instantaneous velocity of a federal financial crimes unit executing a coordinated freeze. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Tasha was sitting in my penthouse kitchen laying out the timeline over black coffee and legal briefs. Trent lasted exactly 45 minutes in the interrogation room before he completely folded. Tasha explained, swiping through a secure legal portal on her tablet. He did not even wait for a public defender. He immediately tried to cut a plea deal by throwing your mother and Aaliyah directly under the bus. He told the feds that Valerie was the mastermind who provided your stolen Social Security number and that Aaliyah knowingly used the fraudulent credit cards to fund her lifestyle brand. I leaned against the marble island, shaking my head at the sheer predictable cowardice of the man. He threw his own wife to the wolves to save his own skin. He is a parasite, Kendra. Parasites do not have loyalty. They only have survival instincts, Tasha said sharply. But here's the best part. The federal prosecutors froze everything. Every single bank account connected to Trent's name, Aaliyah's name, and the fake LLC he set up for the gala. They seized the funds. They flagged the credit lines. They even froze Aaliyah's personal checking account because it was co-mingled with the illicit transfers. Aaliyah was officially mathematically destitute. The reality of her financial ruin was not just a theoretical concept, it was an immediate paralyzing nightmare. Over the next 48 hours, my phone remained blissfully silent, but Tasha's network of legal clerks and city contacts provided a real-time broadcast of Aaliyah's spectacular downfall. Stripped of her husband, her credit cards, and her fake status, Aaliyah attempted to lean on the very community she had proudly flaunted for years. She assumed her elite social circle would rally around her, offering pro bono legal advice or a place to stay while the dust settled. She was fundamentally completely wrong. The country club wives, the women she had toasted with at expensive brunches, immediately blocked her number. In the world of high society, networking financial fraud is the ultimate contagion. No one wanted their pristine reputations associated with a woman facing a federal indictment. When Aaliyah tried to call the senior wives of the church congregation pleading for temporary financial assistance to secure a defense attorney, she was met with dial tones. Sister Jenkins, the very woman who had clutched her pearls during Valerie's live-streamed smear campaign against me, reportedly told Aaliyah that the church's charity funds were reserved for honest, God-fearing families, not for individuals caught embezzling from their own blood. The isolation of the golden child was absolute. For her entire life, Aaliyah had navigated the world, believing that her pretty face, her proximity to whiteness through Trent, and her carefully curated victim narrative would protect her from the harsh realities of consequence. She had never been forced to develop resilience. She had never been required to build a foundation of genuine competence. Now, standing in the rubble of her manufactured life, she had absolutely nothing to fall back on. Tasha received the official police inventory report on Thursday afternoon. The federal authorities had dispatched a seizure unit to the suburban estate where Valerie and Aaliyah were currently barricaded. Because the luxury vehicles, the imported designer furniture, and the high-end electronics were all purchased using the fraudulently obtained corporate credit cards, they were officially classified as evidence of a financial crime. I sat in my office and reviewed the photographs Tasha forwarded to my secure server. I watched the time-stamped images of federal agents physically removing the custom velvet sofas from the living room of the house I legally owned. I saw the tow trucks hauling away Trent's leased luxury sedan and Aaliyah's pristine SUV. I saw the literal physical dismantling of their entitlement happening in broad daylight right in front of the gossiping neighbors who had previously admired their fake wealth. They were left sitting on folding chairs in an empty house, staring at the bare walls, counting down the days until my 30-day eviction notice officially removed the roof from over their heads. In a final, pathetic display of delusion, Aaliyah attempted to launch a crowdfunding campaign online. She titled it "Help an Innocent Mother Rebuild" completely, ignoring the fact that she was an active co-conspirator. She posted a tearful video pleading for legal defense funds, claiming she was a victim of financial abuse by Trent. The campaign lasted exactly 4 hours before the platform's fraud detection team permanently disabled her account. The comment section had immediately filled with links to the news coverage of Trent's arrest and my undeniable ownership of the properties. The digital public square was even less forgiving than the country club. She became a cautionary tale overnight, a trending topic dissecting the intersection of arrogance, entitlement, and spectacular failure. Aaliyah was forced to seek representation from an overworked public defender who had zero interest in listening to her tearful, manipulative stories. The public defender looked at the ironclad evidence, including the security footage from my office, the rejected quitclaim deed, and the paper trail of the credit cards. He bluntly informed her that her only viable option was full cooperation with the federal prosecutors to avoid mandatory minimum sentencing. She had no leverage, she had no money, she had no husband to hide behind, and no mother capable of bailing her out. She was entirely brutally alone in a system that did not care about her manufactured tears. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. When you spend your entire life willingly standing on the neck of a black woman to elevate your own status, you do not get to cry foul when she finally stands up and drops you into the dirt. Aaliyah had actively conspired to steal my properties. She had smiled in my face while attempting to hijack my corporate accounts. She had watched Trent hurl insults at me and simply nodded along in silent, complicit agreement. She was getting exactly what she had earned. The universe was simply cashing the check she had spent 32 years writing. And I was going to make sure every single cent was collected with interest. The 30th day arrived with the cold, undeniable finality of a gavel striking wood. The county sheriff pulled up to the suburban estate right on schedule, lights flashing, enforcing the eviction notice with zero exceptions. There were no extensions, no last-minute reprieves, and absolutely no mercy. Valerie stood on the front lawn, clutching a single designer handbag she had managed to hide from the federal seizure unit. She watched in stunned, breathless silence as the locksmiths changed the hardware on the heavy oak doors of the house she had mortgaged to the hilt. Desmond did not stand beside her. True to his word, my father had formally filed for divorce the week prior. The realization that his wife had destroyed his financial legacy for the sake of an illusion had finally broken his decades of enabling habits. I had quietly arranged for a modest, clean one-bedroom apartment for him on the opposite side of the city. I paid the first and last month's rent, but I laid down a concrete, non-negotiable boundary. I would not pay his utilities. I would not cover his groceries. He had a civil service pension, and he needed to learn how to live on it without a woman carrying his weight. He accepted the terms with humble gratitude, finally understanding that true respect requires absolute independence. He handed Valerie his wedding ring right there on the sidewalk, turned his back on her, and walked away without shedding a single tear. Valerie and Aaliyah had nowhere to go but down. With their fraudulent credit accounts frozen, Trent sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial, and their elite social circle completely blacklisting them, they were mathematically destitute. The country club wives they used to drink mimosas with pretended they did not exist. The church elders who used to praise their fake blessings now actively crossed the street to avoid them. They were forced to sign a lease on a cramped run-down two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood Valerie used to lock her car doors while driving through. The pristine image-obsessed matriarch and her delicate, pampered, golden child were suddenly thrust into the brutal, unforgiving reality of the working class they had spent their entire lives mocking. Because Trent had left them drowning in a mountain of legal fees, restitution debts, and federal tax garnishments, they had absolutely no choice but to enter the workforce just to survive. Valerie, the woman who had spent decades holding court at lavish luncheons and tearing down my accomplishments, was forced to take a minimum wage job folding clothes at a big box retail store. She spent her days organizing clearance racks and sweeping fitting rooms, wearing an unflattering polyester uniform. I heard through the grapevine that she spent half her shift ducking into the stockroom to hide whenever a member of our old church congregation walked through the sliding automatic doors. Alia's fate was even more poetic. Stripped of her imported silk dresses, her extravagant vacations, and her arrogant white husband, the golden child ended up working the cash register at a local discount grocery store. She finally had to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet for 8 grueling hours a day, scanning barcodes and bagging produce just to keep the electricity on in her dingy apartment. The protective bubble our mother had built around her had burst, leaving her entirely exposed to the real world without a single safety net to catch her. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not send them a dime. I simply hired a premium landscaping crew to maintain the pristine grounds of the estate they used to occupy, stage the interior with high-end modern furniture, and put the property on the market. It sold within 2 weeks to a tech executive for a massive multi-million-dollar profit. The funds went directly back into my corporate holding account, adding yet another layer of impenetrable armor to my empire. 6 months later, the air up here is thin, clean, and utterly peaceful. I sit on the expansive glass balcony of my downtown penthouse, the city skyline glowing like a sea of diamonds spread out beneath my feet. The cool evening breeze carries the energetic distant hum of the metropolis, and several of the tallest, brightest buildings in my direct line of sight belong entirely to Apex Holdings. Tasha sits in the plush velvet lounge chair across from me reviewing the quarterly earnings report for my latest commercial acquisition. She looks up, a brilliant, satisfied smile crossing her face, and sets her tablet down on the glass coffee table. "We closed the quarter up 32%, she announces, her voice ringing with absolute victory. "And the State Housing Authority just approved our permits for the new luxury development project. You are officially untouchable, Kendra." I smile, raising my crystal flute of vintage champagne to the glittering skyline. I take a slow sip, letting the crisp, dry bubbles settle on my tongue. I look out over the empire I conquered. There are no screaming matches here. There are no manipulative demands for my hard-earned capital. There is no one telling me I need to shrink myself to make them feel comfortable. Cutting my toxic family off was not a tragedy. It was a surgical removal of an infection that had been slowly killing me for 35 years. Society loves to tell Black women that we have to carry the weight of our families on our backs. They tell us that blood is thicker than water, that we must forgive the unforgivable, because family is everything. They expect us to endure blatant disrespect, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation, all in the name of unconditional loyalty. They demand that we build the table, buy the groceries, cook the food, and then sit quietly on the floor while our abusers feast. I reject that narrative entirely. True family does not demand that you set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. Blood does not entitle anyone to your peace, your sanity, or your empire. Respect is the bare minimum currency required to sit at my table, and if you cannot afford the entry fee, you will be evicted from my life without a second thought. I built this throne with my own 2 hands. I laid every single brick, I secured every contract, and I survived every pathetic attempt to tear me down. I am not half the woman my sister is. I am the entire architect of my own destiny. So I have to ask you, when are you going to stop accepting the bare minimum from people who happen to share your last name? When are you going to realize that your independence is your absolute greatest weapon? When are you going to finally find the courage to hand out your own eviction notices, claim your undeniable worth, and build a throne of your own? The most profound lesson from this journey is that shared DNA does not obligate you to endure disrespect or financial abuse. Society often conditions us to shrink ourselves to make our relatives comfortable, confusing toxic loyalty with genuine love. However, your peace and success are non-negotiable assets. Walking away from an enabling, manipulative family is not an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. True empowerment comes when you stop seeking validation from those who are committed to misunderstanding you and start building your own empire. Drop a comment below if you are ready to evict the toxic energy from your life and claim the crown you truly deserve.